So Musk is suing Altman and OpenAI.
I saw that.
What's your take on this?
I haven't really thought much about it. I think I know the premise is there. It's not what he invested in. It's not what he set up. I think
Right.
he put 100 million in
Yeah.
to have an open. I remember the conference. I remember this is probably, I don't know, mid 2015 ish or something. They all went down to maybe the Cayman Islands, kind of the top AI guys. And the idea was, hey, we need to figure out how to make this align with humanity. This is going to be bad.
Right.
And coming out of that, they established OpenAI, and Musk recruited the top talent, put in $100 million, and it was supposed to be open and nonprofit.
Yeah.
And now it's closed and for profit.
Right. Because I saw him saying, if you just change your name to ClosedAI, I'll drop the lawsuit.
Oh, nice.
Right?
I love Musk.
But apparently though, for him, like, it's the transparency then, huh?
Yeah.
That makes something
Yeah.
in this department worthwhile. But is Grok transparent?
Also, I think his idea is that the for-profit incentives don't align with
I see.
helping humanity, which I don't know if I agree, but regardless, the point is he put in $100 million.
Okay. And he took a shot. Like, that was what he thought was the optimal way of handling AI for humanity. But now he's got Grok, which is not free. And I haven't seen the algorithm. No. I mean, he seems to be more transparent than anybody when it comes to business decisions. And of course, he released the Twitter files, Yeah. But I mean, is that just where we're at right now in the state of AI? Is just, we're going to have a lot of models. Pick the one that seems to align with you.
I think so. I think we're going to have a lot of models and a lot of robots.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of humanoid robots.
Right.
So, and like I said, I think I mentioned this before. I used to think that we would be, the society would be kind of, the music stops and he with the biggest data center wins, which is my way of saying he with the best model wins. It's over.
Country-wise, corporation-wise?
Corporation. I thought more corporation because I don't think countries can really quite keep up.
Corporations within countries.
Yeah, but now I think we're going to have a proliferation of models, and so there will be a best. That doesn't mean it controls the whole world.
Yeah, now that's interesting, because what do you mean by best? Best on a technological front?
Computationally.
Okay, because there's other ways to be best also.
Yeah,
like you could be the best in a given category. And I don't think that possibly, by definition, you couldn't have one that's best in all categories.
Well, the AGI indexes, leaderboards, things they use are taking multiple benchmarks. The idea of general is like apply intelligence to multiple fields.
Yeah.
So amongst a basket of benchmarks, there'll be a best. Right?
Yes.
There'll be an optimal, but by no means does that mean. I mean, the big thing now is, and I'm doing this in one of my companies, is training for specialties. For classifying audio, and I mean, the best at that is definitely not a generic model.
Right. Yeah, because computation is one thing, but we all know, like, you could be the best woke AI, as Google's Gemini demonstrated, and that's not useful.
No.
Right.
Well, it depends on your goals, but no, it's not useful.
And we have
for humanity
been building. It's not quite ready to launch, but it's on the verge. Something that is the opposite of that. We're grounding it in objective reality. And I was thinking about this. Elon builds his as truth seeking. Ours basically is that too. I just don't like when people use truth seeking, because what is truth? We've talked about this before, and people are going to widely disagree about that. And people really it's funny because the things you and I have been talking about for a long time, you can't have a totally unbiased AI. Well, everyone did think that until this Gemini thing. I think a lot of people did think that
they could have.
Yeah. And now everyone's talking about, well, that's impossible. You can't have one that's completely, unaligned with anything. And you got the people building it. And now it's like, it sounds like us, but in the mainstream.
Well, it's interesting because it really comes down to if you think there's objective truth. I mean, if there's objective truth, then it is possible to not be a biased. It's not just about alignment. It is alignment. It's to truth. So if you don't think that, then, it's kind of like our man fallen question. There's fundamental things that if you don't believe them, you have a whole entirely different world outlook.
Yeah.
And I think you and I were talking, if you end up in a debate with friends or family about a topic, I think I told you one of my business partners talks about, you just need to get down to your values and you'll find you share the same values. And I don't necessarily think that's true anymore.
Hmm.
And there's a great example. If you don't think there's a singular truth in the universe,
Yeah.
that's going to give you a completely different world outlook.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then you can just make it my truth.
That's right. So I guess at least, back to the Musk and Altman debacle, or, the clash of the titans, in this space, I tend to agree. Like, if I'm going to use a system, I would prefer to know up front what its alignment is. Like, if even if I can't see the algorithm, I want to know, like, what are they about?
Yeah, that's interesting. Just tell me your
Yeah.
your principles. There's an interesting take. My wife always had this rule. She's like, before you read a book, read the life of the author. That'll tell you everything. Typically books that are maybe popular in leftist circles, the author's life is a train wreck, right?
Right.
And if you go back to classics like Tolstoy, or you go back to certain books, they had good lives. They were married, remained married, they had a family. They weren't depressed, they didn't commit. Who was it? Virginia Woolf that walked into the lake and drowned herself. They had complete.
Well, I would say
wrecks.
Tolstoy, he was definitely on a journey. Like, he
Yeah.
didn't have it all together all at once.
Fair
he
enough.
ended up,
Yeah.
Where a lot of people. But now you're going to disagree about still.
Dostoevsky is actually what I meant to say.
That's okay, but still, you're going to end up disagreeing with somebody on the opposite side of the aisle, over what is good and worth pursuing. And you might say, and I'm not saying you personally, but like, family is a thing and whatever, and they might be like, no, it's not. And so, but if we're all here living in society, at least wouldn't you like to know, like, here's what this company is all about, and their tools for you?
Yeah, absolutely, like public disclosure.
And I would say, if somebody says that they're unbiased, that tells you that they're not, or that tells you their bias.
Yeah, I think
that is a form of being transparent, even though people don't realize it.
Well, would you consider objectivereality.ai to be unbiased?
No, and I've never said that.
But it's biased toward the truth, is what you'd say.
Well, yeah. I mean, I call it opinionated. So much of today, people want to get away from
this bothers me to some degree. This, for many years, I heard people talk about, you have Fox far right, Fox News far right, and you have MSNBC far left. And at the time when that was being said, I'd like point out, okay, well, this show has Hannity and Combs, it has two sides, and and I think for some reason, what I consider objective reality typically aligns more with the right. And I think painting that as just opinionated and biased has a negative connotation. I mean, aligned with truth, I think, is a much better term now.
Yeah. And I think the reason that makes sense, and probably to even somebody who would call themselves a progressive, is because when you get into the academic circles on the left, they'll acknowledge they would call you and I realists, and they would not like us to be realists, but that's a term and a label that they would grant us due to our positions. They just would say we're anti-realists, or we're postmodern, or there's a bunch of different ways to slice it.
Yeah.
So I think that actually that's true, but I don't think a lot of people on the opposite side of the aisle would even, number one, know that, or would take the time to like research or care.
Sure. No, they'll parrot talking points and call you a homophobic racist.
Well, and they're not ever a Christophobe, or get into
Right.
get into name calling.
Right.
And probably part of the problem too, I noticed this with the little bits of the State of the Union that I did pick up, was you have a president basically demonizing 50% of the country, which seems different than in the past, where it's like, my fellow Americans, right? I didn't hear that language, my fellow Americans. Like, it's like, which kind of an American are you? And I don't like that.
It's the grumpy old man on the lawn, presentation.
Yeah.
Get off my lawn.
And I don't care if you're a Republican or Democrat. Like,
we
are Americans.
That started Hillary with the deplorables. You remember that comment?
Yeah.
Calling 50% of the country deplorable.
And whether you agree or disagree,
it's not the right way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, a Republican shouldn't call anybody another human.
I agree.
Because, And this is a whole different topic, but it's just like where's the unity? Like it's about winning now, and it's not about the unity.
It is about winning. It's about debates aren't about. I talk to people about this. It seems like they're no longer about seeking truth. They're about winning an argument. It's like, I don't really want to talk to someone who's not seeking the truth. Like, I'll reflect,
Yeah.
I'd like to talk to someone genuinely interested in seeking rather than just, trying to win a debate.
Yeah. And that's hard because as I found out this week, having a personal conversation with somebody that you really care about, everything these days is political.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tough to navigate a relationship with somebody, that you care about in today's waters.
Oh, it is. I experienced that. I was having a discussion. It's an interesting discussion with a friend, it's actually a family member on the left, and guns came up. Now, he's a gun owner and, likes guns.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow I brought something up. He's like, "Oh, you think they're going to try to take our guns? That's ridiculous." I'm like, "Well, they did it in Australia, and then they did it in Germany, actually, prior to World War II. I mean, this is a common thing." And then it just kind of degenerates into, it's like we aren't really seeking the truth about, okay, is there any effort to, reduce firearms in the U.S. on the left? Like, I think if you don't admit that, you're just not being honest. And there's so many. That's just an example of so many things. It's like if we can't establish what is clearly factual, then how do we have any talks about on top of that, about policy on top of that, or values, or
right? And it just is a naked power game at that point.
Yeah.
And blatantly so.
And that's probably where OpenAI, naked power, that's probably where they're headed.
Yeah. So do you think Musk will accomplish anything with this lawsuit? I mean, the name's not going to change, on the ridiculous front. But I mean,
that's going to come back to how they papered the deal. How they papered the deal means what the legal agreements around the founding were. Yeah. And I'm sure they had so much capital. I'm sure they had good counsel and legal advice to do whatever machinations to change the company that they did. So they're probably okay, but PR has a lot of value, right? So he's accomplishing something, just making this known to the public.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
What are the chances each legal department ends up using the respective AI to feed the contract through? Grok versus OpenAI.
There is no doubt that's happening. There is no doubt. There's legal tech companies with AI starting that are, trained models to help you draft and deal with legal decisions and things.
Yeah. You know what's funny? I really put our AI to a really interesting use this week. It saved our podcast, actually, because we were messing around with the microphones last time. We plugged some other ones in. We were going to test, and there was issues, and we, changed up the settings. And anyways, we went back to these mics here.
Let's use that "we" loosely.
Yeah.
I wasn't changing settings.
Settings were changed. And so anyways, I go to import everything, and I don't hear any audio.
No.
And I'm like, oh no, we sat here for 2.5 hours. And so I went to our AI and I pinged it. And I was like, here's what happened. Here's the equipment. How do I rescue this? Here's the software I'm using, which is Adobe Audition. Yeah. And it just step by step in a matter of seconds, it was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, do this, 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 this. And sure enough, it went from not being able to hear any audio on the track. And I couldn't even see the waveforms. I didn't even know that we recorded, basically. I thought maybe we didn't get power. It was that low. I thought there was nothing there. And it resuscitated, rescued it. And because I had to turn up, all the settings, there's some noise stuff, told me how to get rid of it all. It really felt like a superpower, our AI. Yeah. I'm not talking about ChatGPT or Grok. Our thing, objective reality AI, is so useful.
Yeah, no, I use ours daily, and it's it just continues to prove itself in a myriad of areas. I'm really happy about it. Yeah, we'll be turning on. People are signing up on the email waiting list. We'll be turning people on shortly.
And I'm excited to do that.
Yeah, we're getting our billing system. It's the technologies underneath is all pretty much plumbed and ready to go. It's just we need to get the administrative billing and so forth working.
Yeah.
And we're excited to turn institutions on too.
Yeah. Yes. Anybody with a lot of employees, large student bodies.
Student bodies. I mean, I can't imagine not, for whatever it happens to be, $10 a head. I don't, we haven't determined that pricing, but how you can't give that kind of a tool to your students.
Yeah, because we talked about this. I texted you and somebody said, with the use of AI, students were, finishing their work like 71% faster.
Yeah.
Like there's real benefits here.
I mean, think about it. You and I both use it not only for like technical questions and problem solving, but we use it for learning. You could call that learning, but like more abstract philosophical thought and so forth. And it's not like we're plagiarizing documents. It's like we're learning and we're exploring and we're plumbing the depths of things.
Yeah, I think simmering behind what you're saying is somebody might look at that and be like, isn't that cheating to use AI?
Yeah.
But it's a tool. It really is a tool.
Yeah.
And it's at everyone's disposal now. So it really behooves you to like understand it, know how to get the most out of it, and use it. If everyone else is using it,
you're going to be at a big disadvantage.
Absolutely. And I will say too, like my wife, she's been using it. She is telling me every day, it's old news to you and I what AI can do. But for people that are really just encountering it, maybe are not living in the technical realm or whatever, tech stuff, it's like eye-opening for them to see it and use it for the first time.
It's kind of cool. I've noticed that Alexa, Amazon's devices now I think is AI based, and my wife is anti-technology. She's definitely doesn't like where we've been heading, which is pretty fair when you look at the graphs of the iPhone introduction in society and suicide and death in 2007 or whenever that was. Boy, they all have an angle up. But I hear her in the other room, asking Alexa questions, okay, in the 60s in a presidential primary, what about, and it's like so funny to hear her embrace that and use it because it's so useful. It's like you can't not, I think everybody needs to climb on board unless you're just going to totally bow out of society.
Yeah. But what's crazy though? Actually, I heard Peterson addressing Congress for like 7 minutes, which was actually pretty funny because he had 5 minutes, but then it was like, he was like 8 minutes in and they were like, can you just summarize? And he's like, okay, 10 more seconds. And he went in for like another minute or more. But anyways, it felt like it was, I wrote a paper a while back sort of for our startup talking about, benefits, but dangers of AI. And it's particularly spending time on the manipulation aspect. And not really being so worried about like a Skynet type of AI, but somebody controlling AI. It sounded like
erasing Lenin,
Yeah. It sounded like he had read my paper almost because of the things he was saying. And he was like, it's going to change your perception of reality,
Yeah.
Wow. But regardless, what I thought was really interesting is that number one, we're not the only ones thinking about this stuff.
No. Not at all.
Yeah. And number two, it is important. And if you are what you eat, does that count like mentally also?
Absolutely.
And like emotionally?
There's no
because
doubt.
you have an information diet.
There is no doubt that that's the case. And that brings me to a topic that, you can indulge me or not. You let me know. I saw a lot of pushback on something that was said in one of our former
I wanted to address that
episodes about the plight of the youth and economically how tough it is. And it kind of gets me because it's a pet peeve of mine because I've lived through both. I've lived through this entire 50-year time range.
Can I tee that up by saying what? So last week we had a discussion about can a younger person make it these days? And can they buy a house?
Yeah.
And you sort of said, well, here, like it is possible. You got to work hard. And the comments were generally like, oh, the world worked for the old guy.
Old guy doesn't understand.
But it's broken now. Yeah. And that's sort of what happened.
Okay, so let me set the table and try to establish some credibility. So I, over my career, multiple companies, I have signed tens of thousands of paychecks for thousands of employees. Okay, and that includes minimum wage employees up. I've lived through, working fast food at 16 years old to where I'm at now, and this idea that this generation has it so much tougher is just ludicrously false and demonstrably. And I'd like to just kind of talk through some of that and explain why that is, because you can empirically show it. It's not a question. So when I was young, so this is the 70s, 80s, minimum wage. I think my first job minimum wage was like $2, right? Adjusted for inflation, that's $6 an hour. Okay, so right there, if we take minimum wage today, minimum wage back then, clearly they're doing better on the income side.
Right.
We'll talk about expenses in a minute, but talk about the income side. Okay, when I was young, making that minimum wage, 10% of the workforce was making minimum wage. Today, it's like 2% of the workforce makes minimum wage. Well, it's 1.5. It's even lower. So almost nobody makes minimum wage anymore compared to then. So first off, not only is the minimum wage better, inflation adjusted, 1/10 the people are making that little. Okay, so that's the income side. Now we can talk about there has been a divergence in the difference between maybe the middle class or the upper class. You know, the Gini coefficient between the lower earning decile and maybe the top deciles. But that's not really an honest thing to look at. We're talking about, can you make it, right? So income wise, you're making more.
Yeah.
Let's talk about expenses. So, you know, if you look at CPI, you look at cost of living, you have a few things. You have your housing, automobile, food, some of those things. So starting at the top, housing, as we talked about, the average house is almost double the size it was back when I was young.
Yeah.
So you can't take the average house price,
right,
because that's not a fair metric. If you're saying you have it harder, you're basically saying, for me to have a 1,200 square foot house is so much harder than it was for you to have a 1,200 square foot house. Not true, right? You can do the same math. You can look at the average 1,200 square foot house price today at 180, 230,000, depending on your market. Inflation adjusts back to when I was young, you're getting a better deal. It's cheaper to have that house. Now let's talk about that house. Everything's better in that house. Your lighting is better. Your wall insulation is better. You have central air conditioning. I didn't have central air conditioning. Right in our first house. And, you know, so empirically that's the case. The one that really gets me is auto, right? Because that's a lot. Young people think about their car a lot and so forth. Automobiles. My first car was a 1974 Mustang II, piece of junk, terrible car, no swagger whatsoever. Not picking up the girls in the Mustang. That car I didn't buy. I bought it way used. It was probably 10 years old when I bought it. But the list price for that car new was $3,800. Okay, $3,800. Sounds pretty cheap. Inflation adjusted, that's $23,000 today. What does $23,000 get you today? A Toyota Corolla, best-selling car, maybe Model Y. Tesla replaced it, but has been for a decade the best-selling car. Toyota Corolla LA versus the Mustang II. Okay, the Mustang II and most of the cars at that time frame were dead at 75 to 100,000 miles. They're done. They're rusted out. The engine's shot. Yeah, everything's done. Okay, 100,000 miles. Today, Toyota Corolla, you expect to get 200 to 300,000 miles out of that car. Yeah. Okay. So for the same price, you're getting a car that will last you 2 to 3 times longer. Right. So on the face of it, that car is like cost half or a third as much. Yeah. Now let's talk about the car itself. The tires last 60,000 miles instead of when I was young, they lasted 20, 30,000 miles. Yeah. The cars I had, typical car did not come with air conditioning, right? Came with some analog radio. Now satellite radio is built in.
But so I think this is all very interesting, and I'm 100% on board with you. Now, I think what the main gist of this is I've done that too. Like I've asked some people, do you think we're better off like now than a couple centuries ago? And they're like, why? I don't know. I've never thought about that. I'd have to think about that. And that's the thing. What they're comparing is not to previous generations.
They're comparing up.
Yeah. And now we have this, egalitarian mindset rummaging through our history and our society. And, we hear this talk about equity. And I think when a lot of people hear that, they think equality, but that's not what it's about. Equity is about dividing things up. Yeah.
Equality of outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you know, none of us can choose like what era we're born into. This is our era if we're alive right here. And life isn't fair. It's never going to be like whatever comparisons aside and stuff. Someone is going to have more money than you. Someone is going to be born somewhere else than you.
Yeah.
You know,
and I wouldn't have a problem if the contention wasn't, we have it so much harder than our parents had it. That's a lie. You can say
Right.
if you say
Yeah.
we currently coming out of college or 20 years old have it harder than our parents have it now who've worked for 40 years.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
Yeah.
And that kind of maybe should be the way it works. You work for 30 years, you should probably be a little better off than you were when you were 20.
Right.
But I can't stand it. And the thing I think it does is it makes you ungrateful.
Well, resentment is
There's resentment builds. It makes you live in a state not in gratitude. And I think that's a terrible cognitive position to be in, right?
Yeah.
You need to be happy. You have to be grateful,
Right.
right? That's one of the fruits of the spirit, maybe.
Yeah. Or you could say, you know, if you can learn to want less, that's an interesting way to be a little more fulfilled. Now, that's not an easy way to be more fulfilled, especially today with social media and everything. You see the guy rolling down the street in a nicer car, or you drive past a nice house, and you see it online, and everyone shows their happy side, not their sad side, you know. But that wanting less, I think that's you even if you want to, you could not have it. I don't care. There's some billionaire has more than the other billionaire.
Someone's always going to have more than you.
Yeah.
Someone's always going to be smarter than you.
Right.
Except in your case, maybe.
Ah!
Someone is always going to be better looking, etc. But I think if you focus, I mean, we've talked about Aaron Beck, founder of cognitive psychology. Cognitively, one of the biggest mistakes people make, one of the top 10 mistakes, is comparisonitis. You know, it's like I'm looking left and right to see if I'm doing better. That's a terrible thing to do. What you should do is look backward and see how you're doing better. And that's what gets me is they're looking backward and they're thinking they're doing worse, and they aren't.
Yeah.
So like they're totally misframing.
Do you think it's fair to also, like, if you're going to compete, like compete against your previous self? Like, have you improved yours versus your old self?
Yeah.
You know, in many ways, that's what really matters the most. That's the one thing that you can control.
I remember being a teenager and I was kind of a big racquetball player. And I've mentioned this uncle before who was the marathon Air Force guy. Mm-hmm. And he was always like on the base he was at, he was always like one of the best champion racquetball players. And he was in town and we went and played racquetball and he creamed me like 21-2, 21-1. And I remember that point specifically as being this kind of epiphany that I can still have fun. I'll compete against myself. I'll try to get 3 points next time.
Yeah.
And it turned into this, and it was good. Yeah. Instead of comparing and quitting because I'm not good enough, and it turned in. And I think that's so important. I think stop looking at people doing, you know, don't resent Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or whomever. Mm-hmm. Look at yourself, be thankful for all you have, decide how hard you want to work for more if you want to. Freedom of choice there, but resentment, like you said, is just, that's a destructive thing.
Yeah. And you know, everyone's going to go straight to the billionaire thing, and you brought them up. So neither of us are billionaires, but if we were a billionaire, what would be different? Like, you're still a person. There's still one billionaire has more money than the next guy, right? Or the guy, whoever it is out in the lead, someone else could surpass them. And if not now, like later. So their legacies, you know, like it never ends.
Well, like Musk was the most richest guy in the world, and he dropped in this last 6 months with Tesla stock. And, you know, now there's richer guys. I don't think he's living in resentment. I mean, and it's probably easy to say, you know, once you achieve that level, it kind of, you know, wow, who are you worrying about that? But there's an interesting graph study done on happiness by income. I don't know if you've seen this, but basically they say money doesn't buy happiness.
Right.
Although my phrase is it buys a big enough boat to pull up alongside it.
Yeah. Right.
There's basically happiness does build up to, I think it was maybe about $60,000 a year.
Yeah. And I was going to say 80. So
it might be somewhere in there. Yeah. And then it flattens out because it's kind of like that Maslow's hierarchy. Get your basic needs met. Yeah. And then it gets easier. But really look back.
The returns get smaller. It's
Yeah,
not that it doesn't
exactly.
ratchet up at all, but it's like
It's
diminishing
yeah,
returns.
it's very pretty much in my eyes it was flat, but I'd have to
Yeah.
go back and look. But again, just don't look back and think about, oh, they had it easier. It's just not true. They fought harder. Their average work week was longer. They made less. They had much more meager accommodations, transportation, food choices. Everything was worse.
Yeah.
But so anyway,
Transportation.
wanted to get that out.
I was going to bring that up too, so I'm glad that we hit that, and maybe we'll get some more comments. And I like it's kind of we can have a dialogue.
I'm a truth seeker, so throw the comments in there. If I'm off on something, I'd like to know it.
Yeah,
I believe this is all factual. You can go to the Fed charts, Congressional Budget Office, etc. You can go back. Just make sure you inflation adjust things, because that's something people don't think about. Well, that Mustang was only $3,700.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I only made $2 an hour.
Right.
I mean,
yes.
so you always have to, and there's inflation calculators online. You type in inflation calculator and you can put a price in a year and it'll tell you what it is today. And then you can compare apples to apples. And just then be aware that's not apples to apples, because imagine sleeping. None of you listening to this have probably done it, and I know you probably haven't. Sleeping on top of your sheets in July because it's so hot, you can't sleep because you don't have air conditioning.
Yeah. Well, actually, back in the day, one of the first places that my wife and I rented, it was not a nice place. Well, we had an air conditioner and it was broken. And It was so hot. And I mean, I've been there too. Like I did not just get born into pure luxury or something, But anyways, you mentioned transportation, and I want to bring this up. I saw a really interesting Cybertruck video. I know you've got a reservation, so I want to first talk about.
Was it Moab?
No. So tell me. But I want to know, like, what drew you to this? Everyone says it's so ugly. I know you like Tesla, you're a Tesla investor, and you got a reservation. So why are you interested in a Cybertruck? And then we'll get to the video.
Yeah. So I grew up in a transmission shop, pulling and replacing. My grandfather owned this little one-man transmission shop, and I would work sometimes in the summer for him and do, lay on my back and pull transmissions out. So I've always been kind of a car guy and done a lot of my own stuff. And the simplicity and beauty of an electric motor car is amazing. It's like, I don't remember the number. It's like 60 moving parts versus 1,500 moving parts.
Okay.
So there's a lot less to break. And then there's a can of worms to discuss reliability. Speaking of which, you go back to defects per thousands in cars in the 70s and train wreck. Anyway, so the Cybertruck, I just love technology. I'm a techno optimist. I see that as peak auto technology, right? They've moved to 48 volt architecture. It has a built-in inverter. You can plug, power tools in the back and construct things. I'm kind of a construction oriented guy. Fast.
Which you can do on like a Tacoma or something too, right?
Do they have a built-in inverter?
Tundra. I don't know about it, but there's like a regular 3-prong outlet in the back.
Yeah, okay. That's a built-in inverter. Okay. Yeah, so I wasn't familiar with that. But and then gotta love the stainless steel, hit it with a hammer, you know.
So that was the video, but it wasn't just any video. These guys were taking a bat to it.
I saw that. They broke the bat. They bent the bat.
It was bent.
They bent the bat. Aluminum bat.
Yeah.
They're smacking it hard.
That's crazy.
I don't know of too many things you can do that with.
And isn't that because instead of having like an underbody, I'm not super into like, the car lingo, but instead of having like that chassis underneath that everything's built on, like the whole exoskeleton,
it's an exoskeleton
is the thing, right?
I think they might have backed off of that a little bit, but they basically made their own stainless steel formulation.
It's a new kind of steel, right?
They developed their own stainless steel to handle those stresses.
It's strong, and to the point where I've seen some people of a certain political persuasion, it seems, say that's dangerous for everybody else.
It is dangerous. And I understand that argument. I used to drive a big Suburban, as my family, as I had the bigger family, and auto accidents in the big car, you were twice as likely to live than if the smaller car, which means if you were in an accident with the smaller car.
Right.
So I get that. I don't know if it's a good argument to say we shouldn't be safe because, but yeah, I saw the first accident of a Cybertruck, and the car, the two cars, the other car was totaled, and the Cybertruck, I think, needed a bumper.
Yeah, but it's sort of that argument of you can't innovate because it's bad for everything else. Instead of like, let's all innovate then.
Let's
you
all
know?
rise the boat. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, rise the tide, lifts all boats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't the looks are not even part of the equation for you.
No, in fact, the looks are a negative one way. I like the looks because I'm futuristic oriented. But again, like I mentioned about the Porsche, I think it's too flashy,
Oh,
and I would be uncomfortable driving it.
I see.
It's like a look at me thing, or make people
But
feel bad.
if everyone was driving that, let's say it was as popular as the
Yeah.
Model Y, would you care anymore?
Would I care about the looks? No.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I actually one reason I didn't ever buy the Model Y or didn't want to was purely because it was so popular. I have this thing like,
You want to be the rebel.
yeah, and it's not about luxury. It's just like different, like something different. I don't like doing
You should
the mainstream, whatever it is.
dive in, plumb that depth, figure out what it is in you that wants to be different.
Yeah, that'll be for the Peterson interview whenever that happens. I'm joking.
You need to analyze a few dreams and see what's going on.
Yeah. But no, I do get that. And actually related to this, I won't say the brand, but I just offloaded an electric SUV actually.
Not Tesla, you'll say.
We'll say it's not a Tesla, but it was supposed to be very nice. It was not
It looked great.
cheap. Yeah. And I'll tell you this, it was fun to drive, the electric. Really fun to
A
drive.
lot of torque.
So much.
Yeah.
And I mean, like people would like try to race and stuff, and it
Not
just,
even close.
No, the launch mode, it was crazy.
Yeah, once you've driven one, it's a paradigm shift.
Yeah, but it had all these recalls, and they were like hazardous things. It sounds like I'm lucky the house didn't burn down.
Wow.
Because of the charger and man, fighting with the company. It's like, hey, this isn't I had to dumb down all the settings. Like I couldn't charge it. I had to dumb down the settings to 50% charge. So like it already took overnight to charge fully,
Wow.
but 50% slower.
Wow.
And they didn't even know what the problem was either. And so I was like a rolling guinea pig for like, I think they wanted for like a month and a half, and I couldn't charge it to its full capacity. So I couldn't even go the full range.
That's the danger of being an early adopter.
Yeah.
Sure.
I really learned a lesson.
Again, I think this is an attitude. Like I don't usually get too frustrated by technology because I'm just amazed at what we can do. Right, your computer crashes. I'm amazed that it worked as well as it did until it crashed.
Yeah.
And same way with cars. It's like I would expect if I had the Cybertruck, it's version 1, I'd expect problems, and I would just think that's par for the course, and I would appreciate all the good stuff.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, what good does it do to dwell on the negative? I don't think that helps anyone. So that's my grandfatherly
That's
advice.
a good attitude if you can have it.
Well,
I know not everyone has it.
It doesn't come easy. Yeah, I know. I mean,
Yeah,
you have to
you gotta work on that.
That's your attitude in general. I think
Get your Marcus Aurelius going there.
That's right.
Yeah. So
Meditations. I haven't read that. I looked at that.
I've read pieces. I need to dip into it more. I'm really embracing we talked about this. I used to have such a recency bias. I'm having so much fun. Just like
Looking back.
joy. Finding stuff that no one talks about anymore. Like there is really nothing new under the sun.
What percentage of people have read Marcus Aurelius Meditations?
Yeah, and I would call that more popular than some of the other stuff that I'm discovering.
Sure.
But still, the vast majority of people, not at all.
Yeah.
And maybe you've heard like a phrase or something, and you didn't even know who that was attributed to or whatever. Yeah. But there's so much in all the stuff society is, trying to forget, like Shakespeare and stuff, the obvious stuff. But then I have a very highly curated Twitter, Twitter experience, I'll say, but all these different lists. And I run into people who also appreciate this stuff. And the stuff that they're surfacing, I'm making a list and I'm going to go through a bunch of this stuff. And it's not current stuff, it's the opposite of TikTok, where it's not ephemeral. Like,
yeah,
it's this, it's really enjoyable.
I think, and that brings up a point. It feels like you kind of have two mindsets. It's the mindset of I can learn from others, right? Or I know best and I'll just guess at the answer. I can come up with the right answer. And that always baffles me. It's like I will go immediately, let's say I know how to play the violin, but my daughter wants to play the violin. It's like I will immediately go to YouTube and watch some experts talking about it or read about it. And instead of trying to figure it out on your own. And I don't know why people aren't more like that, where they want to search out the
Yeah.
answers of the past. They just kind of
I think
education, maybe.
maybe when I ran into the idea of memetics first a while back, I know we talked about this probably a year and a half ago or something.
Renee, what's
Yeah. Forgetting the last name here.
Ah.
Luke Burgess is the modern
guy.
who's really taken that up. But yeah, and Jonathan B gave a great lecture series on memetics with David Perel, actually, and it was really enjoyable. That's actually how I encountered this concept. But I think memetics is a great explanation for what drives people's behavior today. And you see something and you have a reaction, and even if you see something and you want to copy it, even if you say like, I'm not going to copy that, that's still memetics, because you're driven.
You have that reference point doing the opposite.
Yeah, that's right. So it really does pretty comprehensively explain things, to the point where people are like, I think it's a little too simple. That it can't be just that simple that it's memetics. But I do think that has a lot to do with it. So you don't see a lot of people, reading the old stuff and talking about it and getting value out of it. And therefore, you're never going to go to, you're not going to mimic that and go explore it.
Right.
And I think that's almost the whole thing right there.
Right.
Yeah.
And we mentioned last week the lack of heroes today. Like real life.
Well, we got some pushback on that too.
Oh,
we should talk about that.
No,
yeah.
tell me.
That was another thing, like, the old guys say no stories, are worthwhile or whatever today. And actually, to pick up where we left off, you kind of said, I said, we used to have like the Odyssey and the Aeneid and these stories. You could include, some biblical stuff in there too, that shaped Western civilization. And then you were like, well, yeah, but Star Wars, it's kind of the same archetype. But the difference is, I was thinking about this, Star Wars got politicized. And we talked about the anti-hero.
Well, remember, I'm talking about the Star Wars, episode 4, the first Star Wars, 1977.
We need that clarification.
Before Disney buys the franchise. And yes, absolutely. No. Yeah, I agree with that. And there you go. Within a single franchise, you see the problem society transform, right? Yeah. It goes from a good and evil to anti-hero mixed, motion, it's in and bad's in all of us. And,
And funnily enough, Mark Hamill now represents the Empire pretty well on his social media.
Funny. That's funny. Hilarious.
Yeah. Did you hear about the YouTube Music employees? I think it was YouTube Music that tried to unionize and then got fired.
YouTube Music.
Yeah, the department within YouTube, I think, that's basically trying to compete with Spotify.
So not creators.
No. Works for Google, trying to compete with Spotify and Apple Music. We're going to unionize. Already, I think if you're working at Google, you probably have a pretty sweet set of perks, let's say. Pretty cushy.
Yeah.
Okay? And what was crazy about this firing, so to speak, I think they were all let go for trying to unionize.
Were they?
They were like at a city council meeting or something, it looked like. I don't have the full context, so someone can look this up, but they were somewhere, and the guy's trying to make his case to the people up front and, basically giving the spiel. And then one of the other union members runs up live on camera on the mic and says, they just let us go.
Oh, I saw that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I just wanted your reaction to this.
Yeah, she was presenting and
I think and then she ran up. I mean, unions.
I grew up just immediately not liking unions. Don't know why. I had family members in unions, but it just seemed wrong to me. It seemed like not in the spirit. And then I remember being young and Reagan letting the air traffic controllers go and so forth. And I don't know where the natural dislike for it came. I think it's fair for people to try and band together and ask for more money. Okay, that's fine. There's nothing illegal or wrong about that. Where we run into problems is collective bargaining laws. Like if government by threat of gun or prison tells me that I can't fire my people because they won't work today, they're on strike. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not right. They have the right to try and get more money out of me.
But if you as a company say, I'm not going to do that.
It's a free arrangement. They don't have to work here. I don't have to hire them. And that's what's always got me.
It's not a bargain. In other words, it's not a dialogue.
No.
If somebody...
The leverage of the government. I
Yeah.
mean, that strikes me as completely out. And then I think unions traditionally have just been corrupt institutions that suck off the working class.
Yeah.
They live great lifestyles, not much. And a lot of these states have laws um, that you have to contribute to the union
Yeah.
in certain jobs. It's like part of my paycheck goes to that beast,
Right.
and the teachers union. I mean,
Yeah.
in my mind, public education is not getting fixed because of the teachers union, the NEA and PERA.
But again, this is back to what do you think is worthwhile? Because there's plenty of people who feel like they like where things are headed and where they like public education, right?
Well, again, I
that's
think
why you have to have choice.
I
That's
think
why you
you're
have to have choice.
intellectually dishonest if you think that, because all the statistics show. I mean, for decades we've had books written, "A Crisis in Education." I mean, like most people acknowledge this, and if you aren't, you're probably not being intellectually honest. Are there some good things about public education? Absolutely. Are there some bad things?
Yeah.
Okay, now let's talk about it.
The main thing is the forcing people to do whatever system you think is good, right? So what's the problem if somebody wants to opt out of that system? Like, you do it if you want it and you put your money towards it, but let me do something else and I'll put my money towards it and my time and my kids.
Yeah.
So it's that compelled aspect.
Did you see Trump announced he would give a $10,000 tax credit to homeschool?
Yeah, I saw that. Now, is that different than the school choice that you've been championing?
School choice is a voucher system,
right?
So I don't
Would
think
this be some sort of extra
I think
incentive?
school choices are basically school choice programs are mostly, they vary by state, but they're mostly about you're going to get your 10, 12 grand check and you can go to the school you want. Probably not you get to use it at home.
Okay.
I would say school choice probably does not include homeschooling.
Okay.
But in my mind, school choice is a lot better step
Yeah.
than a single payer, single institution,
Okay.
no competition, no incentive to improve.
So if I'm somebody on the left and I hear people want school choice or there's going to be some $10,000 bonus for someone who's doing whatever, like, what really is the problem with somebody?
I can tell you.
Like maybe you'll have less teachers or whatever, in the system if there's less support or whatever, but your system is still there.
So
if that's there for you.
The primary argument I've heard from educators is that, well, if all the good students are pulled out, it's at the detriment of the bad students.
But wouldn't they like to then focus on whoever is in the system? It doesn't matter like who's there or not.
Well, they get less money.
If you feel like
so let's say,
but if there's less students, then you need less money.
You're right, but they're saying the good influence of the better students is gone, and then that hurts. We all kind of admit
what is that
you want
saying?
good peers, you want good influences around you.
What is that saying about?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the right
kids?
argument.
Yeah,
but I think it's a terrible argument. But
yeah,
it's keeping everybody down. It's this idea of the way we make everybody equal is not by tearing people at the top down. It's by lifting people at the bottom up.
Well, you said, the saying, rising tide lifts all boats, but the opposite works too. Like a sinking tide sinks all boats. Like, and I think that's what people like, like it's not about the fact that you can rise.
Yeah.
It's that everyone needs to be identical.
We talked about the crab bucket, right?
No.
So crabs, if you put a bunch of crabs in a bucket, they can escape. Okay. They can put their claw up, they can grab the edge, and they can escape. But what happens is once one starts to go up, the others pull him down. So none of them get out.
Is this a real experiment?
It's a real thing. It's a real thing.
What, the crabs are jealous or
you
what?
You can go, it might just be programmed to grab high things. I don't know. But it's a funny thing. You can pull up YouTube videos, I'm sure, of it.
It's an actual natural phenomenon.
Pull each other down.
Yeah. Yeah.
To their death.
Yeah. And what's funny is a single crab in there wouldn't get out by itself.
Yeah, I guess so. He wouldn't be able to reach. Yeah. I don't know. It's
you need someone to step on?
No. Or cooperation. Maybe.
Oh, okay.
Help each other up.
Gotcha.
Give a hand. What do they say? Hand up, not hand out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's a good phrase.
Well, it's just the union thing. It's just kind of ironic, right? Because it's Google. Like they're very progressive, and leftist, but that shows you what they really think about a union
Yeah,
situation.
when it comes down to the
I know Apple's the same way because
to the dollars and cents.
yeah,
it
when
doesn't go.
Apple employees try to at their stores try to unionize, then they'll
Yeah.
like shut down the store or whatever. Like
Musk, they tried to unionize at Tesla, and I'm talking in the U.S., not the Norwegian, and that failed. I mean, they were happy. They make more. They get profit sharing. They get they didn't want it, and they shot it down. Do you know how it ever turned out in Scandinavian countries? I think there was a whole unionization issue with Tesla there.
no,
Yeah, it was a weird one. It was like it's so ingrained in their society that different sections, it's like, okay, we aren't going to unload them from the boat because you aren't unionizing at the factory. I mean, it was, I don't know how it was resolved. I'd like to find out.
interesting.
Yeah.
What do you make of was it Finland joining NATO here and in Sweden recently? The last year, those both.
Yeah. I was literally accused this week of being a Putin apologist. So I'll
Really?
have to, it's just unbelievable. And I'm like, okay, what if, let's go back, because there was a good book written on it. I can't remember the name right now, but chronicling 1,000 years of Russian history, basically what Putin did with Tucker Carlson. There's a book on that.
Which a leftist hearing this already dismissed you because they can't hear from that source.
Yeah. Well, this book was a historian. It wasn't even like a source thing. But, the history of Russia is like continual invasions and hundreds of million people dead, right? Mm-hmm. People invading our border, flooding over and killing us. And so important to them is to always have a buffer where you can't do that. And my analogy to my buddy was, what would we do if China got together with Canada and put missiles aimed at us on our northern border?
Right. It's kind of like the Cold War standoff with Cuba.
We wouldn't stand for that, and we didn't with Cuba.
Right.
And why should Putin stand for it? Us inviting Ukraine. I mean, this has been talked about for decades and decades. Like, you can't encroach NATO closer and closer to Russia.
Yeah.
They aren't going to take it.
Well, I feel like if you stick politics aside and you float out in space and you're looking down at the Earth spinning, and you're like, why does the U.S. need to be over
involvement
in Ukraine?
Yeah.
Like Biden will say, well, we don't want our soldiers going over there. Oh, okay, but why would we need that anyways?
You know how that works. That's that way it worked in Vietnam. Well, we'll send peacekeepers. We'll send advisors. We'll send Canada. Trudeau, just a few days ago, Trudeau said that they might send non-combative troops. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, that's going to go really well.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm Putin and Western countries are putting their troops in Ukraine, how's that going to go? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think it's completely foolhardy if you're floating in space and you're like using a black and a red crayon to color in countries, and you like start coloring in NATO. We're black and we're going to make Russia red, and then you start expanding. I mean, Turkey's a member of NATO now, and now Finland, and now Sweden. And it's like, well, you guys are marching. If I'm an outer space guy, if I'm I'm an alien, I'm watching the West march toward Russia.
Yeah. Well, and what's crazy is not only was there probably an opportunity to bring Russia into NATO at some point in the past.
Yeah.
Like when the Soviet Union fell, like that was the whole reason for NATO to be there in the first place. It could have disbanded, but instead of disbanding, it decided to continue to grab power.
The Clinton era, huge lost opportunity to change that relationship. They were desperately reaching out, and we just let them flounder and turn into an oligarchical criminal enterprise.
I saw someone on Twitter say, if we're going to send some troops, maybe we should draft women.
Nice.
And it does make you think. That's obviously sassy, right, to say. But for all of the egalitarian talk, you don't see like, let's have things be equal.
I feel like that's a clickbait topic right there. Am I right? That's I mean, that's awesome, because it's a great point. This equal outcome, egalitarian concept. I mean, I don't think women want to be drafted. Probably most women.
I don't know. But you don't see women fighting for equality. You see them fighting for equality like in the C-suite, but not necessarily for like plumbing jobs or garbage collector or.
Yeah. Peterson years ago did a great bit on this. It's like almost all deaths that happen to men are suicide are men. Almost all deaths in military are men. Almost, and he just went through and, deep sea fishing. It's like everywhere people die, it's men. And is that really what?
Job related?
Job
Because
related.
obviously women die.
No, job
Yeah.
related.
Okay. Job related.
Profession activities. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I see.
but no, I'm afraid. I'm a little bit afraid of the whole Ukraine thing. I mean, we've got to diffuse that. They've got to settle.
Yeah.
Some kind of peace talk and give them a piece of the property. Call it good.
I don't know. Yeah. Otherwise, so you mentioned Vietnam. You're older than me. You have more insight, to some of the history post World War II. It seems like things really changed, and we got into this cycle of the endless wars.
Yeah.
Why? It can't just be a empire type of thing. Can it? Geopolitics?
So part of me has defended the Vietnam experience for a long time. We were in this phase of Soviet era expansion, right? And they were expanding like everywhere. I mean, you can same kind of thing as the alien map. You can watch communism expand through the eastern, through the world, really different parts, Central America, everywhere, and Cuban Missile Crisis. They're coming to Cuba, and it's like, okay, they have weapons that can destroy us, and so we can't let them continue to expand.
Right.
And so, but I understand the concept of Vietnam and Korea, kind of with the Chinese, but
conceptually, but it's not like some major thing got accomplished.
No.
Objectively, you can see where the line started and where it ended. Okay, and then you fast forward even to like Afghanistan, and now you look at Ukraine, and it's like really, why?
Where do we get?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me tell you my personal evolution. So I was, I've always been this kind of the idea of, so there's the Bush Doctrine. There's two kind of concepts of what the Bush Doctrine was, but for me, the Bush Doctrine, in his second inaugural address, he says, we have the chance to have democracy around the entire world now. It's like we can kill and get rid of despots, and I like, yes, we can do this. This is it. You plant seeds of democracy in Iraq. You do, in Libya. You do this, and we can. This is it. This is good stuff. And I kind of bought into that. And he serves out 4 more years. Obama gets in, flounders around a while. Everything goes badly. And now I have this attitude. It's like, we don't have, because of our republic and changing administrations every 4 to 8 years, we don't have the political will to stay in long enough
for any sort of long-term conflict.
Yeah, which is why I think Rome, the Roman Empire, I think they had this deal where they'd bring in a Caesar in time of war and go back to the republic in times of peace. It's like you need one leader to fight wars, and he's got to stick with it and decide what to do
for a while.
So now I think, Afghanistan is like the complete. I'm even Iraq. I think complete. If we aren't going to do it long term, we've got to not do it at all. Too much blood and capital.
But it's the weird shit for me is I'm even old enough to realize like Republicans used to be seen as the people who were like, well, let's go to war. But now it's the Democrats who are the war hawks.
Alignment.
I don't. And it's like nobody even noticed, even on the left.
I don't know why.
It's just like, is that what we're doing now? Okay.
Yeah.
We're for the war now. What?
Yeah.
What?
Well, I think something's happened. I think big tech corporate America, and I think like defense contracting, and I think big corporations, lobbying, money laundering has moved left. It's like we can buy politicians. If I'm Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, if I'm a big defense contractor, I have so much money to put on K Street and hire lobbyists. And I think they can buy Democrats now easier than Republicans. And I think it's same with Google.
So you do think ultimately there's a war machine. They want to make money. They've captured those corporations have captured Congress, Senate,
all of them.
Politicians.
All of them. I'll tell you a story.
And it's just about making money. That's a continuous.
I think that's it. And it's pharmaceuticals, defense contracting, big tech, and they're pulling for it in AI. Hey, if we get big regulations in here, we're the only players
Yeah.
who can meet the regulations. And they then kind of protect their little financial empire. I had a buddy who was working for a startup that made lead detectors, like some kind of optical way maybe to detect lead. Lead poisons the body. You want to get rid of it and things. And so he was visiting. I lived in Virginia, and he was visiting DC. What are you doing down here? And he's like, oh, I'm lobbying. We are going to try and get a new regulation about inspecting Chinese goods coming in for lead. And I thought, that's interesting. I'm watching firsthand a small little company might have some effect and increase the cost for everything.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I will admit, two sides of the equation. There's a benefit, like maybe less lead, but government's just not the way to do it.
So at this point, is that beyond repair? Like, is it so captured you couldn't fix it? Or, and I guess there would have been a time then. You're basically saying,
Afuela.
yeah, but that's only the government. That's not the corporations.
Well, if you strip, so the thing is, I'm still a corporatist, I guess you'd say. If you strip, because that's all voluntary, I can choose whether to buy Google or not, right?
Yeah.
If you strip away the power of the federal government, you don't have corporate cronyism. They don't go to the government to make laws that make you collective bargain, that make you buy an X-ray detector, or a lead detector. So yes, I think that fixes it, right?
So it's not.
We recognize that people are selfish, and we recognize that in companies, but we have the freedom to switch if they're screwing us.
Yes. So I just want to clarify for you, it's not about a monopoly and having too much power.
I don't believe in natural monopolies.
Okay. Explain that.
So, this is a big debate. My sons are both have degrees in economics, and we debate this a lot. They're kind of raised probably a little more Keynesianism. So monopolies are when you control, I'm going to not do it justice, but you have like basically control of an entire market.
Right.
I don't think that exists, right? You'll always have someone compete.
As a category.
You'll have someone, I believe, oligopolies exist. We have a few players in each space, Windows, Apple.
Yeah.
But the thing is, what happens is you only need two competitors, as long as they don't collude. We can talk about collusion being illegal. That's something different. But if I'm Microsoft and I'm making a 90% margin at an operating system, people say, well, they're too big. Nobody will take them on. It's not true. I mean, you'll take Philips, in Holland. There's multi-billion-dollar companies and maybe even trillion-dollar companies now that if there's a market opportunity to compete, they'll do it. And we saw that with Apple and Microsoft over the years, right?
But okay,
push back.
Okay, well, I just want to. So the main clarification is you use the word natural, so that implies artificial monopoly.
Yeah. So government granted. So what I call non-natural, government granted.
Okay.
So if I'm a town, you have it here. If I'm a town and I say, okay, cable company Y, you can lay your cable under the road in our conduit and serve these homes. They now have a monopoly because the government gave them the right to do that.
And no one else can do it.
And no one else. There's no competition, right? So that's kind of
unless you're Starlink.
Well, and that's my example that I will argue with people who say, oh, yeah, there's definitely natural monopolies. No, you aren't taking into account that the example they'll often use is you have an island and a company makes a bridge and they charge a toll. They have a monopoly because no one will compete by making another bridge because I'm like, well, yeah, I think they can compete, but let's put that aside. There's other ways to do it. There's boats. There might be drone planes.
Mm-hmm.
Starlink for cable,
right?
ISP. So yeah, I think it's lack of thinking outside the box and understanding how we ratchet up the game by inventing new ways to compete with monopolies.
Okay. Now you mentioned like a big company like Philips. A little pushback there might be like, wouldn't it take a startup really to compete in an area like that, and then people are like, well, would they have the resources?
So,
Because
so usually what you yes,
once you're
usually,
an established company, you're
yeah,
not super innovative. You're
yeah,
regulated, you're bogged down.
usually they buy the innovation. So you have the capital.
Okay, all right, yeah, you're right about
you have
that.
the capital of a large company,
Yeah.
and they find startups to fold in to compete with.
That's
and
true.
and stay
That's
relevant,
true.
and stay relevant. But I really don't believe. I may not even believe. I mean, yes, a government granted monopoly totally is a thing, because there are certain times you can't. They're using again the power leverage of gun or jail to not compete with them. The U.S. Post Office is an example of this, right? They have laws that you literally can't send mail any other way. Now we can send FedEx because they changed the law years ago.
Right.
And now if you have an overnight, what do? Do you go to the post office? Probably not. You almost always use FedEx or UPS.
Yeah.
And they did it better. They changed the law.
Yeah.
Government still has monopoly on first class mail.
Yeah.
In fact, the government uses that monopoly. They sued the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts had years ago, they were doing Christmas card delivery.
Mhm.
The freaking government sued them because only the post office can do first class mail.
Yeah.
Come on, man.
I feel like what I'm hearing is competition is imperative. It's like an operating system, for you, for everything almost. And that I see the benefit, and it's almost like a power law. So, you've heard me say my personal, phrase that I live by is the truth won't mind questions, because it's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And to watch out when people don't want questions.
Mm-hmm.
There's something about that. And it's almost like,
it's true.
What is the equivalent to that for competition? Because if something doesn't want to be competed with, then what does that tell you?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have competition, you don't improve. It's natural to try and probably protect if you can squash competition, that's going to benefit you, right? Because the way capitalism works, it's a beautiful thing, right? It increases features and product quality and decreases price. That's like literally what it does. It competes price down to zero. There's graphs that show you a product becomes commoditized. When you're the only one making an SD card, you have high margins.
Yep.
People now the government can grant you a monopoly and give you a patent. And now you're the only one making SD cards. Your price is going to stay high for a long time.
Right.
And once there's competition, that price comes back, capacities go up, speeds go up.
But it's not even just companies. It's like, we talked about this.
Public school,
government, even.
Government, local governments versus
ideas.
Yeah.
Basically competition is what I'm hearing as
I think it's a fundamental building block for sure.
Yeah, that's maybe the way to put it.
Yeah.
And so when someone doesn't want any competition,
you make the point. It's not just material improvement, but education, everything.
But part of the problem, that's not a very egalitarian approach, because then something necessarily has to be able to be considered better or worse.
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead of all the same.
I mean, I guess in the end, you probably have two choices. Like we said, you pull everything down to an equal level, or you let the tide rise and maybe some boats will go higher, but everybody's going higher. We talked about the wage deal, and wages have gone up for everybody, and they've gone up higher for maybe the upper 20%, maybe even more than that. But the point is, so there's a bigger gap, but the point is everybody's doing better. Isn't that what you want?
Yeah. So I think some people don't want that. And so what's the old quote? Like, where man is free, he's not equal. Where he's equal, he's not free. I forget who said it.
Where man is free,
basically
he's equal.
Yeah. Because people then can take different paths.
Yeah.
It's, rather than being forced onto the same path.
Yeah.
Maybe.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
My son had a good observation last summer. Came out of Mass one day and he said, looking at people at Mass, everyone's equal. Everyone's equal unto God.
Ah.
He's like, there's rich people there and there's poor people. They're all the same at Mass. And I thought that's that's kind of a cool observation. And that's probably that sovereignty of the individual that our forefathers had. we're all equal under God. And you aren't going to be equal economically. Some people will be prettier, smarter, but you have equal opportunity or equal under God.
Yeah.
That's the key.
That kind of aligns with something that I always think in my head, which is something either is or it isn't. And in that instance, you're not God and everybody's not God. That isn't God, so there's that. But it gets back to our conversation on language and definitions and like it's not the main mental mode of the day today to say something is or isn't something. Anything needs to be able to shift.
Everything's
and
a shade of gray. Everything's
yes, it's
again, that's like
not
my hero.
binary.
That's like my movie thing. Good versus evil. Good, bad. Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah.
But that is an interesting distinction, though.
Yeah. It's that's interesting.
And on our AI front, I feel like some of this plays out like with our product, because here we are, we're coming to compete. We're a startup and competing against some of the big players. We wouldn't do that if we didn't think we had a shot.
Right.
If there wasn't a reason for people to use our product.
Yeah.
I
think what is interesting about what we're doing is it's, for me, and I think this is true for you, I don't even think the primary motivator is financial. I keep saying it's like if we can get if people aren't exposed to Google's lies, Gemini came out was just a great example, but there's some mission behind that, right? It's like you can leave things better than you found them. I grew up backpacking in the Colorado wilderness, and there was this phrase that you leave things better. Well, actually, the phrase was take nothing but memories, leave nothing but footprints, something like that, right? One of these squishy.
Clean up your trash.
Yes, clean up your trash. But I've kind of lived by this: try to make things better or equal, leave them equal or better than you found them. Mm-hmm. And it's like if you can get people to not have to use that woke lying, right? We know the Vikings weren't all brown skinned. That's a lie. Right. If you can get people to have some truth, then that's, to me, kind of an aspirational mission type of thing.
Yeah. The problem is I think that there are genuinely people working on projects like that, on the Gemini product, that I think they actually do think that they're doing something worthwhile.
I do believe that.
And that it's good and that it's changing the world, leaving it better.
Useful idiots.
Yeah, and I know they would say,
no offense, useful idiots.
I think they would say the same thing about us, like that we're the useful idiots, and that we probably those two guys, they probably actually think that they're doing something,
Yeah, but I mean, again, I guess this comes down to values. If you think lying is a way to justify the end, that's just a different way. That's a different belief system. I don't think that is true. That's definitely not representing truth. I think you have to have principles, and I think generally people would say, I don't even know anymore. Do you think people think lying isn't a principle that you should uphold? Not lying?
Yeah. I think that the main thing that, let's call it, just like anyone who's like non-religious probably like lives by, is like do whatever you can get away with.
Yeah.
Do you think?
I think that's true.
And I don't mean that as a slight.
But as a principle, do you think that they would, if they tried to state an aspirational principle, I don't think they would say that. It's like you should do whatever you can get away with.
Well, because
I think they do that in actuality. But
that's because now this is an area where reality just makes itself manifest, because things really are or aren't. They really are one thing or not.
There's truth.
So you can try to encapsulate the thinking in a phrase and try to make it a big bucket, but there's always something outside of the bucket. Like if you're trying to be inclusive, to be inclusive means to exclude something. Definitionally,
to swap
something that's true means that there's something that's false. Like there isn't a bucket big enough to encapsulate everything. There just isn't.
Yeah.
So things really are or aren't. And
you do exclude. Yeah, I'll give you a great example of exclusion. So my son calls me in the office years ago. He was applying to where he was, I think, looking at law school. And the data, man, when I was young, you had no idea. You just applied and, cross your fingers. Now they have like scatter plots. They know all the statistics and details. So he showed me the scatter plot, and on the y-axis was the GPA. This must have been undergrad. No, and maybe GPA and LSAT, the law school exam. And then you had a bunch of people represented by dots, got this score and this GPA, this score and this GPA. And then green got admitted and red did not, was denied admission. And so you could draw like a diagonal line. You saw exactly, you need this GPA and this score. You could figure out the combination. And he's like, look at that, Dad. And in that field of green were some red dots. So I got a 4.0 and I got a 780 LSAT and I did not get in. He said, click it. Click any of the red dots. Every single one of the red dot. Okay, so first of all, let me say there was an equal green dot below it. They basically swapped. And every green dot you clicked in that did not, every red dot you got in that did not get in was an underrepresented minority. So they literally took better scoring. They might have been Asians, they might have been Caucasians, I don't know. They took better scoring students and they denied them admission and took someone who didn't score and put them in. I mean, and it was stark as could be. You could see this.
So, yes. Now.
And they're private, and I think they should be able to do that if they want. But be honest about it. The Supreme Court said you can't do that.
Right.
Just recently.
So I think that's important. I like what you're saying is this is a private institution. If that's what they want to do, fine.
But that doesn't comport with our, civil liberties laws. Like that's racist to do that, even if it's reversed.
That's right. And you could even understand how somebody who I would feel like hasn't completely thought everything through would feel like that. Well, those people aren't going to ever get in. So they for whatever reason, if someone's not going to get in, maybe we need to give some the opportunity because they're not going to have it otherwise. And if that means that you're not going to be able to have some, whoever the poor dot is that got, displaced, that's too bad.
But there's no intellectual consistency there. You can't just, and the Supreme Court said that it was, I don't remember the name of the case, but it was Asian students against Harvard who didn't get admitted. Yeah. And they're like, you're being racist against us. And they were.
Yeah.
And they said, you can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
So,
because at the end of the day, this is what can be frustrating about it. Like, you can say something to somebody that if you're having a political debate, and then you can take up and champion policies that are at odds with the person that you're talking to. And I feel like that's kind of what I experienced this week. If somebody says they care about you, but then their policies clearly benefit everyone, literally everyone but you.
Yeah. It's funny.
There's a disconnect because yes, it's just policy and,
but it has practical implications.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so tell me this. Let's bubble down to a fundamental layer. I said, hey, they're private. They should be able to do that. Let's say you ran a small restaurant and you think, I don't want people who are dirty and smelly to come in. Are you okay with that?
Well,
as the restaurant owner,
if the point of the restaurant is to stay in business, and if someone's going to come in and make other customers leave and not pay, I mean, you've answered the question right there.
Do you think as a restaurant owner, you should be able to discriminate against people you disagree with politically?
I guess probably the backstop for me is not compelling as the government, the behavior of any restaurant.
Or entity. No, I'm just talking. Yeah,
which would mean that someone would need to be able to run things how they want to.
Right. So
I'm not advocating in any.
And you're good with that. So you're good with saying, I'm a restaurant owner. I only want Republicans to come in my.
I think
restaurant.
that you have to proceed on principle rather than emotion. And if you're going to do that, that means that some things are going to exist in the world, necessarily that might be ugly that you don't like. Because I don't think that it should be compelled.
So let's talk about civil rights. So do you think you should be able to exclude protected classes from your business?
Well, I think in principle, if you're going
Yeah,
to allow somebody to this really what this is, if you zoom out, this is like why did God allow evil? It's that discussion,
it's
right?
funny.
Can you have
Yeah,
free will? Can you if everyone
bad things will
can't?
happen. Bad things will happen, but
Yeah, I mean it's basically that same thing. And obviously, yeah, bad things are going to happen if you allow for freedom.
yeah, no, I agree with that. So the Colorado cake baker,
Yeah.
right? You should be able to. That's a little different. That's like based on your religious convictions, but I'm such a free marketeer that I think the market would solve for that, right? So what people say is, well, this restaurant wouldn't let blacks in. It's like, I think the market solves for that. I mean, I think plenty of restaurants are going to let blacks in. It's not going to be a problem,
Yeah.
and vice versa. I mean, when Trump took over Mar-a-Lago, it was anti no Jews allowed. There was actually a policy you
Hmm.
couldn't join as a Jew. And it's like, and he changed that. It
Mhm.
wasn't a government thing. He changed that. But yeah, bad things will happen. But I think the market would solve that because there's a market for people who are excluded.
Right. As we are basically addressing
Now we're on the
with
minority. Now we're on the minority side.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I don't think the government should compel people to use our, objective reality.ai as the minority and we feel like we're slighted. I don't
Right.
think people should force it. The government should force it. But there's a market there. Someone will come in and serve it.
Yeah. Or not. That's the other side of people tend to vote with their wallet and their attention.
Yeah.
And if a product is genuinely not good or wanted, no one is going to buy it. If it's inferior, doesn't, not
Yep.
beneficial. If you're a restaurant and you have crappy food, people don't want it. It doesn't
Restaurants,
matter.
to me, restaurants are some of the best examples. I was talking to a doctor and he was going to stop being a doctor and get into politics and medical regulation or whatever. So I'm like, this is interesting, guy. Let's talk about this. And it's funny because I put forth this idea, and I've said it before. We have McDonald's to Morton's. We have all food qualities, and we, as a result of that, bad ones go away, good ones come in. We have the best fed population. We're overfed, right? But when you regulate medicine, you don't have that anymore. It's that pulling everybody down to one level, that socialization, just kind of hurts, I think, everybody. It's like, in principle, I understand. It's not fair. Let's try and make everybody equal and help everybody. But in the end, I think it hurts most
Well,
people.
that's the thing. Yeah. Because it's really an emotional, feelings based thing. Let's not make
feelings-based thing.
somebody feel bad.
Yeah.
No one can feel bad, but you can never not make someone is going to end up feeling bad when you have any
Yeah.
sort of regulation or in.
Let's ask how the kulaks felt in Ukraine in the was it the 30s?
Right. Yeah.
They felt pretty bad, trying to make everybody equal,
Yeah.
or ostensibly trying to make everybody equal.
Right. Right. So there's just no getting around it. And so,
South Africa's experiencing that now, right? That's
Yeah.
happening with the farmers.
right.
They're killing all the white farmers, and
No
they're
one's
running
talking
into-
about that in the media.
and they're running into food problems. It's like,
Right.
duh. That's
Yeah.
exactly what was it. Stalin, I think. I mean,
Yeah.
come on.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's that whole idea about competition, and even in the area of ideas. What feels so dangerous about our modern situation here in America is that other ideas are increasingly not tolerated. Now, if you look at it through the lens of the truth doesn't mind questions because it's the truth, why would somebody not want you to ask questions or present an ulterior thing? Because I would argue we don't have a free marketplace of ideas anymore. We effectively really don't. Almost.
Let's push back on that. So, yes, I feel that, like, knee jerk. I feel that we've lost, the ability to debate on campus, and we're all being fed from one kind of media. But on the other hand, how many sources do you talk about from X or from social media that introduce you to new ideas or historical ideas? And in one way, I feel like maybe we have more now than we've had.
Yeah, but I'm just talking about the mentality. Like you can see in the survey results, like younger people are more
Yeah,
in favor of censorship,
yeah,
and that's the generation that's coming up. We
yeah,
obviously have people in government who are pro censorship,
yeah.
and
It
just because
it
something
might be
like
inevitable. It might be inevitable. It's like if you aren't close enough to. I remember talking to my kids about the Vietnam War, or I was saying, hey, you need to factor in like global conflict or war as a potential existential problem. It's not just retirement or getting killed in a car accident. This is like statistically, this is a thing. Nah, that's crazy, Dad. We're in a peace. We haven't had a
Mhm.
war for X, and it's like, yeah, I mean, feels like we have one or two every 100 years. For all of mankind, and it's like we need to and so what I saying is, it might be inevitable that they support censorship and all these things because they're so far from a time and place to feel what that meant.
right. Well, we're back to that safetyism thing
Yeah.
and just a naked power struggle thing.
And Rand coming from, all these people coming from communist Cuba, or Russia. Ayn Rand came from Russia, I think. Did she come from Russia?
I
I can't
don't know,
remember, but she came from communism. And anybody who came from
which
that,
is funny because she was such an atheist.
yeah, right. Well, that might be part of it. But on the freedom thing, anybody who came from that knows what not having freedom's like and what censorship is like.
Yeah.
And they would not tolerate it, from their speeches to their writings. So, and if we get farther and farther away from that, maybe.
But that is the thing that's really scary about it is if we get to a point where you're not even allowed to think a certain way, like literally, expression is one thing, but thinking,
Yeah.
and actually Peterson brought this up in his congressional testimony. He was like, obviously the obvious stuff like China, they've got 700 million cameras or whatever. And not only do they recognize your face, but your gait as you walk. So they can track everything. We've got gaits going up, so like you can't even like have mobility based on your social credit score. But then he was also talking about combine that with, obviously we all have so many photos online. Our phones, our technology basically know us. Like
Yeah.
there's a simulation.
Yeah.
You could easily put together a simulated Richard or Chris based on our usage of our data, our services, our phones, combine that with our pictures. Like we basically can almost be reduced to data, almost. And
And
then if you imply a CBDC, like a social credit score over all of that, you could get really nefarious.
well, it's terrifying. It's your phones know you. I one of my companies, before hiring, I would look at their Facebook. Like, you can kind of know them, right? You get a pretty good sense of who they are.
Mhm.
So AI is going to be able to do that in a heartbeat. And have you been watching the 15-minute city concept
Yeah.
at Canada's? I think
Well, break it down in case somebody doesn't know.
Yeah, 15-minute city. I'm no expert, but I think the principle is and China's doing it. They put up fences and gates, and you have to check in. You're only allowed to try work in this radius. Do
That seems
commercial
more like a
activities.
hard power version of what, because I think there's a
Yeah.
soft power version.
Yeah,
too.
well, this is a hard power version
Okay.
for sure. There's no, speak about freedom. If you don't have a freedom to travel, that's it. Yeah, you can only use shops within this radius. You can only do things a certain area, and then you have to have permission and scan an ID. to get
Basically,
in
you
and out.
can get about 15 minutes or so away
Yeah.
from where your
That's your
house,
circle.
where you're living. But see, there's a soft power version, which is let's get rid of cars, or and
Yeah.
let's just like take it and try to put everything that you might ever want or need around you, so that you wouldn't even want to leave. Like I think this is the vision I've seen proposed, and then how do you do that? Well, you demonize certain types of vehicles, you incentivize different things, and you basically talk people into it.
Yeah.
To basically having less freedom.
And they go with it.
Yeah.
I don't get that in Canada. You think, okay, well, that's China, but
Well-
Canada is proposing that in one of their cities is to do
Yeah.
a 15-minute city.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
There's a lot of tests going on, but a lot of that's driven from globalist people like the WF. But that's interesting because I was almost thinking of our AI that we're building. It's a startup, and it's an option, and it's almost like a digital version of like locality. So what I mean is, I would advocate for a system of government where local government knows the people there best, and you shouldn't have
Yeah.
the power should be closer to each local community.
Accountability.
Yeah, and I feel like
And moving in and out of social contracts then easily.
Yeah, and I feel like our startup in a way is sort of like that, because you get to move into a locality, an information locality
That's interesting.
You know what I mean?
I like that. That's a good analogy.
Yeah, so it's kind of the digital version of
Yeah,
this
you've talked about
physical
these
conversation.
digital nation idea of being a sovereign state unto yourself.
Yeah.
And yeah, so to some degree that's possible. But I still say, we have to live in the physical world. So we're still locked into the social contract of our country.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
Yeah. So
Unless we get a guy who will start ripping off government agencies off the whiteboard.
right.
That's easily probably in the last 10 years one of my favorite things.
Yeah. that was
way up
hilarious.
there.
So obviously you're not keen to live in a 15-minute city, so called. I mean, what's the best alternative? Like, if that's where things go in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends. Like I said, I've been torn between techno optimism and neo Amish communities, right? This concept. So,
Well,
depending how hard things lock down and how much pressure and regulation you have, I get more pushed toward this idea of, okay, well, going back to agrarian society.
Practically speaking, like, if there's in a city, it's real easy to have, tons of cameras, for instance, that track you, and you got to pay with your Apple Pay or whatever the Android alternative, and maybe that gets connected to a digital dollar wallet or whatever, like in the city, all this techno control is easier. Yeah. So the second you're moving out to a municipality that's like really small, then they're just definitionally, there's not a ton of places to mount a camera, and maybe you're more off the grid, so
there's a city in the Northeast, I think maybe Vermont, that has their own currency, a town.
Oh yeah.
Do you know
no,
about this?
I don't know about that.
Yeah. I'll do some research and we can talk about it next time. I came across them years ago and was surprised that it was functioning, that the government didn't shut that down, but they have their own currency, something bucks, the name
well,
of
that's
that
almost
town
like what
bucks.
corporations used to do. They would pay their employees at the mine in something that they could only redeem at the store.
At the company store.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all learned about that in public school. That's a bad moment in corporate history. But again, as we're more able to, I was thinking about this pushback from the youth saying we have it so much harder, and it is true. Like rent in San Francisco skyrocketed. Can't be there. I'm not making the argument that a poor person in San Francisco is going to do really well. Although the average salary in San Francisco is way higher too.
Mm-hmm.
But Grapes of Wrath, who was it? Who's the author of Grapes of Wrath? Anyway, people, even in the 30s, people moved, right? The Depression hit, no jobs here. I'm getting in the car, I'm driving across the Dust Bowl and going to get a job in the vineyards.
Now you're back to competition, basically. And it's not even competition, just options.
Yeah.
And that's what I don't like when I am hearing the clips that I'm hearing from like the State of the Union and just, left politics today, is what's wrong with options. It's the forcing, like you have to believe like this or there's going to be consequences.
They know best. Somehow they know best, which is kind of crazy because it feels to me like in all spheres of knowledge, you need a whole bunch of independent trials, which is what capitalism does really well.
Yeah.
Right? Thousands of independent restaurants open up. Some of them survive. The really good ones start to franchise. And
But I feel like this sort of burrows back to the academy side of things and academics, the higher education, because you have this credentialing system. You talk about someone knowing better, feeling like they know better. And these days, I was going to bring this up earlier. You were talking about, your kids and getting into college and stuff. And we've talked about, is it worth it to even go to college? So we have the internet. We have all this knowledge out there available for free. So what really is the benefit of going to college at this point? It's not necessarily that you can't learn whatever you could learn there. In certain instances, like if you're going to be a surgeon, for instance, you're going to need to go in and do the hands-on. But maybe not if you're going to be a lawyer or like something else.
Yeah.
And so what really is it? what really is academics these days, but a stamp of approval for a certain way of thinking.
I agree. I think my oldest came home from college, first graduate college, and he said it was a scam. I could have learned it all faster and for free online.
Yeah.
Spent all that money. It was a scam, right? But it's still, if you're going to do graduate school or if you're going to do certain companies, Fortune 500 companies that are checking a box, and that's their easy way to screen. But there's movements. Peter Thiel is paying people not to go to college.
Yeah. But it creates that. See, that creates an interesting revolving door problem. I saw a breakdown of this where you had people who graduated from Stanford ending up at McKinsey and then going to the government. And it was really no different. Their role, and they were all just kind of scratching each other's back and that revolving door. So you get the credentials,
corporate cronyism,
get the stamp of approval. And how does that play back into what you were talking about with competition and monopolies?
I think we're coming. I think the academy is starting to be threatened, right? I think we have, like I said, Peter Thiel pays people not to go to college. Google a few years ago, dropped their bachelor's degree requirement. They're like, yeah, some of the best coders we have are high school students who are hackers, And so I think there's an acknowledgement. I think William Bennett, I think I mentioned him before. He was Secretary of Education under Reagan. He wrote a book 10, 15 years ago, and he basically said, yeah, college is finished. We're going to move to a system of credentials of like, you take a test like Cisco certification, Microsoft certification. And I think that's a great thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
or almost more like apprenticeships in a way will make a comeback. Do you think?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I have mixed feelings about that. I like the concept, but most of that's happening now is in unions. They have, apprentice, tradesman, journeyman. They have these levels and it's just like this iron-fisted union type of thing.
But just because that is happening there, like doesn't mean as a concept, like
there's one or two states, like maybe Mississippi, where you don't have to have a law degree to become a lawyer. You can pass the bar, but you had to have worked, basically apprenticed, paralegal or something, in a law firm for 5 years or whatever, 8 years.
Yeah.
I'm like, boy, that kind of thing. See, that's what you need. You need to flood the market and then have private organizations certifying which attorneys are good and which attorneys are good at which thing.
That's pure merit, though, if somebody can just pass the bar. But you're always going to have somebody pushing back and be like, well, so-and-so from this circumstance always had life against them, and they're not going to be able to do that,
Yeah. Well, yeah. Again, to me, government granted monopoly, licensing physicians, licensing attorneys, all that does is drive the cost, the minimum level. You're not going to go out and hire an attorney for less than $150, $200 an hour right now. A good attorney is going to cost you $1,000 to $3,000.
Yeah.
And that doesn't seem like it should be. I think there's plenty of people who could do a decent job at representing someone or drafting a will or a lease for $25 an hour, $30 an hour. But we can't do that because there's this artificial limitation of supply that the government, supply and demand. If you limit supply, price goes up.
Yeah.
And the government limits supply of doctors. It limits the supply of medicines. It limits the supply of attorneys. So
in that legal instance in particular, probably AI will step in and be that cheaper thing.
It already is for me.
Yeah.
I use AI for law, have used it several times instead of paying an attorney.
Yeah. The AI doesn't call you up 6 months later and be like, yeah, I forgot to bill you for this thing you didn't ask.
I've saved several $1,000s, not a ton, but
how does that work in medicine?
I'm one guy.
Yeah.
Oh, medicine's the same way. I mean,
it
can diagnose better than people now.
Well, diagnose, but what about like a surgery?
Yeah, not now, but soon as Optimus is threading a needle, it can do surgery, right?
Yeah. So
you
eventually,
can thread a needle, you can stitch a patient.
Yeah. So in that regard, it seems like people on the left who want equality then would be really excited about AI coming in and robots being able to,
No, because they don't have a consistent worldview.
yeah,
Right. I think. Well, I don't know. Some of them are, I suppose. I think I told you
that would
that
make things more equal.
calcium scan that I had done last week, the heart scan. I was told as I walked out it was going to take a couple days for the radiologist to score it, and then I took the CD as I had to find a CD player, for a computer, put it in, and no, it's computer scored now. It was already done. It was done the minute I did it. The score was there.
Interesting.
So that's X minutes of a radiologist. It probably takes them 10, 15 minutes to score like that, go through the.
So do you think that existing structures like, schools of medicine, where their business model is to train certain, types of physicians, and then that goes out and the insurance companies, make some money, and, what do you think the reaction from those sorts of pre-established, but how? If there's
government regulate, they'll lobby government and they'll
Yeah.
say you've got to regulate this because it's a threat and it's dangerous, and they'll pull in 12-year-old Susie who was injured from a medical accident. I mean, it's kind of shameless. That's another reason I don't watch State of the Union anymore. I'm so sick of pointing out
cherry
free
pick
stories,
things.
and it's like it bothers me. So yeah, I mean, because government has power, then the big companies, whether it's insurance companies or medical schools, they'll push back, and it won't be until we get so sick of it. Like school choice, I've been a proponent of for 20 years, 30 years, and it's not till now that it's actually starting to come to fruition.
Yeah, things take so long,
and it's because the teachers unions fought that,
but just
hard.
in general, like the left didn't sweep into power, overnight. Like this is something that's been happening over decades, and any kind of change would have to also probably happen over. It's not going to be overnight, like
afuera. I went it overnight. I think it could happen. I mean, Argentina, I told you they balanced their budget overnight,
but he didn't get elected overnight.
No,
things had to happen and build up to the point, so
that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping there's a big enough groundswell pushback. However you feel about Trump, I heard an interesting quote. He's calling. People have been asking me how could Trump win? There's just if because again, 70-80% of Republicans think the election was fixed in 20, and 30% of Democrats think it was fixed. So the Republicans will say, well, they're going to, there's cheating last time. Why wouldn't they cheat again? How can you? And Trump has this line, too big to rig. Like if that margin's too big, and I think
I wonder if he got that from Vivek actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
that's awesome. I like it. So the idea there is if the groundswell is too big, and I feel like that's happening for education. It's like you're destroying my children, and there's enough parents and there's enough school board where the parents are complaining. I think maybe you get some change quickly.
Yeah, that's so. I saw a bizarre video of some teacher saying, here's why we display certain images and things. I won't even say what they were in the classroom. And the way she started was saying, my babies at school talking about other people's kids. Like that's you're a teacher. These are not not your babies.
They do think of them as theirs.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. And this gets into a whole
and
thing.
they spend 8 hours a day with them.
Yeah, in many ways, the parents that have outsourced, but all of that used to be a choice. Like, as feminism swept into, power really, over time, that all used to be like a choice that maybe, people should outsource people taking care of their kids and spending more time with the kids, so that women can be in the workplace. But I think these days, when I was growing up, that's just the way it was. And you assume when you're born into a system, like there's probably a reason why everything is the way that it is. Leave it alone. If it's working,
that's a mistake.
And then when you think about it, I found people get really upset. Yeah.
Don't challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's crazy.
Well, it's hopeful. I think there's some
Yeah.
hopeful signs. I think people are. I think we become more polarized, but I think some of the traditional institutional power has gone too far,
Hmm.
and it's like, yeah, we aren't. You start to get that when people have $100,000 student loan debts for degrees that are not employable. And you get that when your kids don't have any competency. They're reading at sixth grade level and it's a senior year in high school. And you start to get, and they start pushing, transgender bathrooms. And that causes some pushback.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. This is totally off the subject, but I did want to get your take on this. And I meant to bring it up before because I feel like you're going to have an opinion on this.
Me with an opinion.
So I heard somebody talking about.
Your challenge next week is to come up with a topic where I say I don't really have an opinion on that.
Oh, I got you before on that.
Okay.
Because you're honest is the nice thing. If you do,
I hope so.
If you don't have a good opinion or feel like you can't answer it, then you're honest.
And we usually just talk about things we're interested in, and if we're interested, we probably have tried to
yeah
understand the research.
Yeah, and this isn't a hot button or anything, but someone was talking about files versus apps, and I'm sitting here thinking AI is likely to kill all apps because it's just going to be like a one size fits all thing. Like any app is basically going to be like you hit the AI, it custom codes whatever for that second, and it's ephemeral and it's gone. Like eventually, it'll get there eventually. And if that's the case, like I have a bunch of apps that I use right now, and a lot of them I would have a hard time like disconnecting from. And somebody was like, what I do is I always choose files over apps. So they'll use like a note taking app where everything's stored in a folder on the desktop rather than, and that's like transferable. Like I could take that and
Notion versus,
Yeah. I mean, what's that notion of files over apps? How do you do it personally? And what's your,
Well, given it's tax season and I'm involved with about 12 different tax returns, I'm locked into a tax software, and the whole benefit of the tax software is it takes last year's data, imports it. You're starting from a basis. It's proprietary, and I had a computer crash, and new computer installed new software, can't import. Where is it from last year's? You can't find it. It's not like it's all proprietary data. So I do definitely see the value of that. But from a technical development side of things, it's definitely there's benefits to structured data that you store in a database or so I'm not sure I have an opinion on that.
And how does that how will that work in the future if AI is just are you going to just have like a database kind of like a general and
boy, I don't know how that plays out. I mean, I do agree you'll just talk to your assistant, your agent, your assistant, and it will take care of I mean your email. It'll take care of everything for you, I would assume. I'd have to think more deeply about it. And there will probably be, initially there'll be companies like OpenAI where it's stored in the cloud. And slowly, I think people will give you freedom of data autonomy and you'll have options. It'll probably be you'll have multiple versions going on.
What's your take on whether or not a lot of people don't even know what an LLM is or AI, but maybe fast forward several years in the future, almost like having a battery backup generator for your house in case of an emergency. How important do you think it is or will be for people to have their own local LLM? Maybe it's not the most capable thing in the world.
Yeah.
But if there's some emergency, power's out for weeks.
Yeah.
We've talked about this before. You could basically rebuild civilization with a local LLM.
Yeah.
As long as you could power the device.
Yeah. No, I think I shared with you, I downloaded Wikipedia.
Oh, yeah.
You can download Wikipedia.
Yeah.
So in my mind, this is before LLMs. In my mind, I could do.
So was it like searchable and stuff? We had the search field and you could like, okay.
Yeah. I mean,
so that was kind of your version of that.
You can go do it still today. I don't know how big it is at this moment.
But you basically don't need to now with an LLM.
Yeah. The LLM has compressed Wikipedia, times 1,000 into a model that is the size of probably Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I totally think that's
it's like
useful.
a nuke went off. What do I do? You know, like,
Yeah.
you know, it would help you in almost every
It,
situation.
it would. I've thought a lot about this.
How do I grow a garden?
Yeah. The problem is, we've something I think about as a father, and you aren't there yet. Is if your family is distributed across the country in a scenario like that, you're really stuck.
Mm.
You may not see them again, right? Unless
In the event of a major disaster.
Yeah, unless one of you stays in a certain area and they make their way over a few months back to that area. I mean, maybe, but communications, we are so dependent on communications. I mean, to your point, same with the data right now. Or if you don't have an internet connection, it's pretty hard to look up anything.
Yeah.
Right? It's pretty impossible. So communications, yes, you could take that piece and get it locally and get a lot of the functionality. But talking to other people is going to be severely hampered.
Yeah, that's weird because that's basically how people lived forever, you know. And
Like 99.99% of humanity's history, we lived without that communication.
If there was like a war going on, you wouldn't even know if someone was alive or not for a long time, if maybe ever, you know. It's troubling. That is weird to think about.
I think about your code word idea for knowing if an AI is calling me or if my actual child is calling me.
Yeah. The problem is if the government had enough control, they would know your code word.
They would, unless you came up with an algorithm that rotated the keys daily.
Now you just described something that almost nobody can do.
There's a product.
Maybe you can.
There's a product, right?
Yeah.
There's some kind of and they have these for bank accounts. If you have like a high net worth brokerage account or certain bank accounts, they give you a key a fob that is changing. Well, authenticator apps on your phone do that.
Yeah.
It's changing that code all the time.
Yeah.
So they know on their end what your code should be.
Yeah.
So I think you could do something like that, probably.
Yeah.
You have a physical.
Let me ask you then.
Separate device.
Is there such a thing as actual real encryption these days? And what I mean is, if you're a government and you have a big enough supercomputer, like, and you want into someone's account or phone, or hacking aside, is there a way for them to get through?
No. So you can encrypt.
Really?
It's all about bits of entropy. They call it in the security arena. And so, I'll give you an example. If you let someone have a 4-digit PIN, you have how many combinations? 9,999.
Right.
Maybe plus zeros. You have 10,000 combinations.
Which a computer can go through real quick.
Boom, right? So now you change that to 4 letters and numbers. And there's 26 letters and 10 numbers. So now you have 36 to the power of 4 bits of entropy, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know how
Still, my iPhone could probably work through that eventually.
And so what it is you can get enough bits of entropy where no supercomputer, for example.
Quantum computing.
Well, okay, put that aside for now.
Okay.
But let's say if you take 4 random English words, say there's 100,000 English words, and you take 4 of them, it's 100,000 to the power of 4, which is like more atoms than the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And a computer can't do that in a billion years. So
so it actually would be easier to either hack the person with the password or the device, maybe find a backdoor that doesn't require.
Or a man in the middle attack. Man in the middle is where you're intercepting the data. And the password. But it's possible. And there are good encryption algorithms that basically no one can break. Most encryption that we're doing right now, probably the State Department, the intelligence agencies can hack and break.
So is that due to like regulation? Because it's kind of like the AI discussion. Like, will the government allow a powerful enough AI in the hands of regular citizens? Is that what happened with encryption?
I think no.
Like, I couldn't, as a consumer, get my hands on something that's totally uncrackable by China.
Yeah, you could.
Oh, you think I could?
Yeah, you can.
In principle, uncrackable.
Yeah.
Could never.
Yeah. Well, now, putting quantum computing aside, because that's a whole different.
So how would that work?
Yeah. Quantum computing has the promise of both making uncrackable encryption itself and like breaking all current encryption.
Right.
So
because I hear people talk about that with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Is that an actual threat to Bitcoin quantum?
I've studied that a bit. I'm going to say I don't have an opinion right now. I don't have enough knowledge to.
So it sounds like maybe.
I have thought it was. I read a pretty good paper saying it does not, and when it does, 50% of the Bitcoin miners will vote to change it.
Oh,
So probably not that much of a worry.
so you feel like that's a pretty robust system, it sounds like.
Oh yeah, it's really robust right now. Yeah. I mean,
And could never be.
do you know the financial incentives? Like, what's the current market cap on Bitcoin? It's
I haven't checked in so long.
300 Bitcoin current market cap. It's the financial incentives to crack Bitcoin are bigger than any financial incentives ever done. 1.3 trillion.
Oh wow.
I mean,
is the cap right now?
Yeah, that's insane.
Right.
So there's the best minds on the planet have been working tirelessly for decades.
And governments,
to
I'm
beat
sure.
that in governments.
Yeah.
And not cracked. So,
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
Versus, you can literally, I think, find YouTube videos of people in Asia with fancy printing presses making $100 bills.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so actually, with the digital dollar discussion, it's not dissimilar to crypto. And you have Bitcoin. Seems like a good option already for people if they want to have.
I've thought about for our platform
accepting
only Bitcoin.
Smart business move for sure.
But
hard, how many people are using it? But
that's the problem. You really limit your audience.
I'd like to have the business acquire some, sure.
Yeah. Musk has some Bitcoin.
But I'm just saying,
Tesla.
like, why wouldn't you just mass adopt that instead of having a CBDC? There's only one reason.
That's government power.
Yeah.
Well, and this ostensibly they'll say, hey, and you see this already in congressional hearings. They'll say, oh, it's only being used by criminal enterprises,
right? As if the dollar's not. But
yeah. Right. And much greater number of dollars being used in the criminal enterprises.
That's the same thing with guns. It's like, if you took away all guns, are people going to stop mass killing people? Like, you're going to take away all the cars so they can't drive into a crowd or someone can't build a explosive.
A lot of the biggest crime cities, Chicago, DC, are anti-gun zones.
Yeah. You can see it in the data, but
nobody cares to look at it. When I lived in Texas, and when I lived in Texas was like probably the most permissive, one of the most permissive on guns, and like girls I worked with had guns in their glove box.
In Texas.
How
long were you down there?
A year.
Oh, okay.
And they, they've talked. I saw John Stossel. I used to really enjoy John Stossel, kind of a libertarian guy, but he would interview felons in jail in prison in Texas, and they would talk about it. They'd be like, yeah, we won't do this because they might have a gun. The crime was lower because of the gun, because you don't know who might pull a gun on you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I found that really interesting, but yeah, you don't fix human nature by taking away the tools, I don't think.
Yeah, human nature. So we kind of, if someone needs to like chart out the recurring topics on our, because we hit the same things:
competition, human nature,
limits.
Yeah.
There's some good ones. Well, that's kind of what's going on in New York. I don't know if you saw this, but they've called in the National Guard to secure the subway system.
Yeah, what's that about?
Well, it's like if you let chaos reign. It's almost like, we talked about a system is what it does. You don't have to guess about the system. Immigration, you don't have to guess. Like, the system is what it does,
Yeah.
And so it's almost like if you let chaos reign, and then you see the National Guard showing up, a system is what it does, Now, you didn't solve it by not having any weapons.
You solved it by bringing people with weapons in.
Yeah,
I mean, they had big ARs. I saw pictures of that.
Right, right.
It's kind of crazy. The interesting follow-on to that, did you see? So there's this debate about whether violent crime went up last year or not over the past couple of years. And the FBI, I'm going to read it to you, the Uniform Crime Reports the FBI keeps, says that the crime rate went down 2%. Then there's the Bureau of Justice Statistics National Crime Victimization Survey said it went up 104%. Okay. So now if I'm like a politician, it's like I'm going to pick the one that, that 104 versus -2.
Yeah.
And they're both the FBI and the Department of Justice. They're both pretty reputable, sources. not reputable, but yeah, I don't know what word I'll use, but
Yeah.
people would believe
Right.
statistics from those organizations. And what it comes down to, I think, because I tried to dig in, so the uniform, no, the National Crime Victimization Survey, they take like 60,000 households, and they're like, have you been a victim of these crimes? So what it turns out being is people aren't reporting to the police anymore because the police don't do anything.
Oh, right.
So the crime's happening, and they're like, "Hey, look at crime's down."
Yeah.
And no, it's just like the police are overwhelmed. The forces have been cut. People have left because of the persecution of police. And
Mhm.
so people don't even report. It's like we're being victimized and we can't even have the police help.
Yeah, and you got to step back and look at that and say, what is the purpose of having more crime? It's not. You would stop it if you wanted to. So, what is the actual
You would
purpose?
stop it if you wanted to. Well,
Uh,
but maybe it's a side effect. Maybe it's like, it's not that they want the crime, but they want more equality or lack of, I don't want the politics of prosecuting certain ethnicities, that type of thing.
right.
Yeah.
But
So
I'm thinking
it comes down to I want the power.
even more than that. Do you get the power by basically imparting chaos? You don't say, "I'm
true.
going to impart
There's
chaos."
a word for that.
You just do it.
Anarcho tyranny. Do you know that word?
Yeah.
It's the concept you're
Right.
saying right now. It's like this known thing where, and this is the problem people have. I remember talking to one of my boys about this. It's like they think they don't know how bad people can be and how manipulative governing powers can be. And this idea of, I talked about this agent provocateur, where you send someone into rallies, or you send someone, maybe it's January 6th, we don't know, to stir it up and cause problems. It's like, well, no, that's diabolical. No, we've done that for thousands of years.
Agent, prop, and person form.
Let's say it again.
Yeah, propaganda
Yeah.
designed to agitate
Yeah,
in person form.
It happens, and then just what you're talking about. Let's cause chaos, because then it's easier to control people.
Well, let it burn,
That's a
and
thing.
then offer
That's
to
actually a thing.
to put out the fire.
Yeah.
But it's now under whatever terms you propose.
Yeah. You're depressing me.
Sorry.
Should we end on a depressive note?
No, let's not.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, what is something that gives you hope in light of everything? I mean, I know you're gonna have different answers. You're gonna have a spiritual side,
Yeah.
and there's stuff that keeps you busy. You wouldn't be building our startup if you didn't feel like there was hope that,
Yeah.
you know,
So I obviously don't think I'm dying tomorrow, because I wouldn't be doing most of the things I'm doing at the moment. Spiritually, I think we're headed to God, and God's got this. Physically, I think, on here and now, I think this backlash from society toward how far things have gone is probably promising. I mean, I think we're seeing it in different countries around the world, right? We're seeing it with, Argentina. We're seeing leaders in different countries, Boris Johnson a little bit, and Trump, and you're starting to see people push back. It's like, I can't freaking say Merry Christmas. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
That was too far for people.
Mm-hmm.
They're still pushing further. So I have hope that is happening. I have hope and feel good about the fact that we can find more common, some people call it, living in your own bubble, but I think it's just people with common value systems. It's easier to engage with them because of social media. So I think there's good and bad in all these things.
Yeah.
And I think there's hope that the good works. And I think humanoid robots and AI are going to usher in abundance. And we're going to have just really, hopefully the next generation won't complain about how hard they had it before, we had humanoids. Now that we have humanoids, it's so tough. I don't have to pick up my own trash.
Yeah. I think, what's your take on, like, it's sort of like we all got dropped into the gym. And what I mean by that is you don't build up some muscle without having the heavy weights and like lifting them,
Yeah.
and it's the same thing. Like you have some tough stuff going on. Well, this is an opportunity to build up your muscles, and you could sit in the corner in the gym, or you could like start putting in the reps.
Adversity builds character. You
Yeah.
need it.
Yeah. And so
You should welcome it.
you could look at it as an opportunity,
Yeah.
to make a difference and to be useful. But it
that's a good point.
requires shouldering some responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
having some courage, because courage when nothing is risked is not courage. Right. And that's
True.
scary because we've built our modern life around basically being as pampered and feeling as good as possible. And that's a whole different discussion. There's lots of ancient history that says when you reach the point where it's just pure decadence,
Doesn't turn out very well.
you're almost about to walk off the cliff,
Doesn't
right?
turn out very well.
But if you already factor into account everything that you could lose, let's say mentally you pre-lose it already. You're like, I've counted the cost. This is worth it. I'm going to do it. I expect some suffering and pain here because I think that it's worth it.
Yeah.
Then already you're already
freedom.
Yeah. And so that's what I think. I do see a lot of people. There's a community forming, I think I've witnessed, where people are trying to build a future that they want to live in, that is a different option than where things seem to be heading. And I feel like that's a really positive thing. And it's not just the big names like a Jordan Peterson. I'm starting to see some other people who are trying to put their money where their mouth is, who are taking, various stands.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying like, wait a second, you're telling me I'm offending you, but you're offending me. Like, don't I count for something? Like, I'm seeing that. And I think that's really helpful. Now, I haven't even touched on anything spiritual yet, really.
Yeah.
And of course.
Did you read Manna yet?
No.
Marshall Brain? Read Manna for me.
Remind me.
Manna, Marshall Brain's a guy who started website how it works or something, how stuff works.
Okay.
And anyway, he wrote a book probably 10, 15 years ago called Manna. And it was basically two versions of the future where AI, basically, and robotics maybe, lead. And one was these, I'll give you the overview. One was these Terra, what were they? I don't know. There are these cities where basically the poor were walled in. It was just poor and rich. And the poor were they didn't want to see them, and they locked them in these places. And then the rich had this nice area. The other was Australia, basically. Like somehow a corporation bought Australia, and you could have ownership in the corporation and pass it on to your heirs. And you go there, and everybody just was pursuing their, higher calling. It's an interesting book. It's an easy read, and it's really kind of elucidating of maybe two potential futures. I talk about this land of abundance. It's like, because I think there is potential for really bad outcome for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's almost like, if you give me a long enough lever, I'll move the world. The things that seem impossible, I've found that oftentimes it requires less work or whatever than you think.
Mm-hmm.
But the main thing is the actual lever is starting, like doing it.
Yeah.
Because then you'll never, first of all, you don't know how hard something is or isn't until you attempt it.
Mm-hmm.
So part of it is just figuring out what you should attempt. But yeah, just making the decision in the first place to do it. And just because you could have an outcome where you have the rich walling off, the poor people, doesn't mean that you can't have the buy Australia thing. And that's the thing.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing. Having hope in the first place,
that's
even
everything.
when sometimes otherwise you just shut down.
I shared the rat experiment, right?
Do you have a book of experiments at home that you just?
No, this is a great one. I don't think I've shared it on the podcast.
Let's hear.
So they take rat and they drop him in a bucket of water. Time how long he swims till he drowns, right? And it's 8 minutes, something short. I don't hold me to the numbers, but this is in principle, this is accurate. Okay. So now and they repeat that experiment. It's pretty consistent. They give up in 8 minutes. Okay. They take another cohort of rats, they drop them in the water, and when they're just starting to give up hope and drown, they pull them out. Okay. They save them, let them take a day or two off. Those rats, if you put them in the water again, they'll swim for 48 hours because there's hope.
Huh.
It's
Interesting.
completely shocking. So all
Interesting.
you need is a little hope, and
Yeah.
it changes your entire disposition.
Yeah. And do you think it matters whether that hope is real or fictional?
Well, probably not, but it probably matters if you think it's real,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
imagine you have to believe it's real,
Right. So
so you can be convinced
it's
that
not
there's
hope per se.
It's the
It's
belief.
Yeah. Interesting. Because that's why I have said for a long time that I feel like having examples for people is really important. And I feel like that's part of like what I'm really getting out of going back through history is, for every situation that happens today, technology changes and stuff, but there's some analogous thing that happened in the past
Mhm.
that you can take hope or inspiration from, or even if there was a non-hopeful situation, but you learned like what not to do.
Those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's probably some rat experiment or something that shows that too, right?
I'll look that up for next time.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, I mean, I think you can learn the psychology of a lot of Jordan Peterson's that way, right? He was studying lobsters or whatever
mhm.
and hierarchies in lobsters. And I think you can learn a lot about how we're wired and how we work through some of these experiments.
Yeah. But on one other note, I just want to, I feel like one thing that comes along to crush your individualism and your potential goals or aspirations is the idea that, yeah, however you feel, whatever, it doesn't matter because we need to do what's good for the greater community, like the good of everyone. And I know that was back when COVID was really like a big deal. And now that the government has basically said, well, treat it like the flu now, at the time, there was so much that you couldn't say or think or do related to that, and it came up often. People would be like, "Well, I remember saying to somebody, "Well, I try to respect different people's opinions," and that was my way of just kind of let's not talk about it.
Diffusing it.
Yeah, and someone looked at me real seriously and said, almost with disdain, but not when it has to do with other people's well-being. Not if it's going to jeopardize other people.
Yeah.
Like you basically need to get whatever society prescribes for the good of everybody. How dare you?
I heard that. I endured quite a bit of that. So 2 out of my 5 family members got vaccinated and boosted. 2 of my family members did not get anything. And I got 1 and then didn't like the data I was seeing, so I didn't get the second one. So like we had the perfect distribution. And like people, other family members and friends knew about this. And they were just so incredibly rude, like, venomous, I can't understand how people, could endanger other lives like this. And it's like, yeah, man, I see how this, I mean, people on social media were calling for them to not get medical treatment,
Yeah.
for them to be killed, to
Right.
be isolated, to lose their jobs. And it's like, well, you kind of see how totalitarian happen.
I was going to say, how is that
happens.
not totalitarian?
Yeah, I mean, that you see, it was scary. It was scary to me because it was a frickin' bad flu.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't even like MERS, 35%. I don't know if you remember Middle East respiratory, whatever it was in Saudi in the area. That had 35-40% mortality. And I told my family, yeah, I would be duct taping the cracks in the doors. I get that. This is not a big deal. But the vitriol from, a good chunk of the population was scary.
Mhm.
It's like if they're like this on this, what if it's really bad?
Yeah.
They're going to be like shooting people.
And the problem is if you can produce a sufficient emergency or perceived emergency,
And you can control.
yeah, and I even can understand how some of the people that I know that were so crazy about things got arrived at the placed it they did because I look at their information diet, and that was a
You don't, you
foregone
don't,
conclusion.
here's something, and so I'm really getting political on this, but if you read the New York Times front page every morning, or the Washington Post, or both, you don't need to talk to liberals that day. That's all you will hear them say. They just parrot those. They can't even go deep like into the article. Like they don't know the arguments, but they can cite those headlines, right? And
I
they've
suppose they would
reworded
say
it.
the same thing about a Republican. I'm just envisioning if
I'm sure they
you-
say it, but I don't necessarily agree with that.
But then
I don't
it's
know.
just back to which source do you trust? Who do you trust?
Yeah,
Which
you
experts
don't.
do you
And
trust?
that's kind of the point.
Should
They
you trust?
They trust blindly what I consider to be fallen man, who have inherent conflict of interest and perverse incentives, right? I mean, going back to Merck and Pfizer, the most killing, Merck and Vioxx was unbelievably bad. Even the smallest estimates are tens of thousands of people were killed
Right.
by their deceitful, lying, fraudulent things, and billions of dollars and tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of people killed. And how do you put your trust in them? And I don't know. Maybe the right puts their trust in. I don't trust anyone. I go to original source documents, try to research subjects thoroughly.
But that's not most people. Like, I think a lot of people
Fair
just
enough.
want someone to make the decision for them and tell them, and it feels good to be aligned with whatever group feels like, is the majority. But this is back to doing things in principle or not, because there's a lot of critical thinking going on, but not across the board, So it's not even that people don't think critically; it's that they don't think critically in all areas. Is that fair? Do you think?
I don't think the general population thinks critically. I think if you gave
by proxy, how about from the media or sources they trust that?
But I don't think they're thinking critically. I don't know if I shared this story. What's his name? Peter Malone. He's the guy who basically figured out how to get mRNA in a lipid molecule into the cell. So he's this molecular biologist guy. Yeah, I think he has a patent on it. And he came up with this 15 or 20 years ago. He came out really rapidly. Two things he was saying: you can't use the I forget where you multiply the genes to detect the virus, the testing. Can't remember what it's called. He came out saying you can't do that because you can replicate that enough, you find anything anywhere. So you're going to say everybody has COVID. Second thing, he's like, I don't think we should probably use the mRNA vaccines for not test out. They tried to cancel and persecute him, but he was pretty darn well respected, so he didn't totally get canceled because he's like the guy who invented this. And I heard him once speak. He said, the most frustrating thing about this is that I will have 24-year-old journalists debating me about this topic. It's like they don't know anything. They're a journalist. They don't know anything about the topic. I contributed to it, inventing. He didn't have this egotism that I'm projecting.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the problem. It's like, even by proxy, the journalists aren't critically thinking.
Journalism isn't journalism anymore for the vast majority.
I think a lot of science isn't science.
Yeah.
I mean,
the job of journalism is to speak truth to power, so to speak. Maybe that's one way to categorize it. That's not happening. That's not happening.
No.
And I don't care what side, that's just.
And it should be a check on democracy, and now it's turned into a propaganda tool for the government.
Yeah. So, okay. Well,
so my advice there: don't trust
or
humans.
Trust but verify.
Trust but verify. That's fine. Yeah. Do some research. If you're going to have something that affects your entire life or other people's lives, spend an hour at least.
If all you do, I don't care who you are on what side. If all you do is just trust and you never verify, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
I don't even care what side of any issue you're on.
I agree with that.
Yeah. So we had the pandemic, and that seems to have mostly abated. We're still hearing it talked about stuff, but that was an emergency where power could be seized. So what do you think the current emergencies are? I think I could lay out 3.
Let's hear them.
Quote unquote emergencies.
Let's hear them.
Obviously, Ukraine.
Ukraine.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other one would probably be January 6th, insurrection. This is a topic I was talking to somebody. I said, Trump hasn't been legally,
Yeah.
the insurrection charge did not stick to him legally. No one at January 6th was charged, but it's still billed. The narrative is billed as insurrection. What do you think the third one might be?
I don't know.
I don't know because I just forgot myself. Yeah.
But you caught me. I have to speak just a moment on the January 6th thing. So it's actually the Washington Post, I think, keeps a database of all the convictions, right? So I spent a couple hours a few months ago going through all the convictions because what you hear is that was a bloody, murderous attempt at government overthrow.
Right.
Okay. So putting aside the most well-armed population in the country didn't bring any guns there. I don't know that their intent was probably to overthrow the government.
Mm-hmm.
Like if anyone's going to do it, it's them. They have all the weapons. No guns. Secondly, you go to that database and look at the convictions. Almost nobody was convicted for any violence. A handful of people, pushed a policeman. There was some of that, but there were like 500,000 people there. And you're talking about half a dozen, a couple dozen, whatever. Hundreds of convictions. They're all about parading and trespassing and interfering with an official proceeding.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you go to yourself, go to Washington Post, look at their database, read the actual chargings. Yeah. And this one, the obstructing official proceeding is now going to the Supreme Court. That they think it will probably be overthrown because it wasn't really, they don't consider that law was part of Sarbanes-Oxley for not shredding documents at Enron back in the day. So they think that's going to get overturned and then that's going to get rid of all those charges. And that's what the big Jack Smith is pushing on Trump. Half of the charges or something are around that. And I mean, it's kind of insane.
Well, it almost like give me a headache to even think about talking to somebody about that on the other side, because you even just bring it up and they're just programmed to unleash.
Well, they brought in that producer from ABC to orchestrate the January 6th hearings in Congress. Did you know that?
No.
They brought in a producer from ABC and they made the hearings in prime time. And so this producer organized it to make it seem, and it's and they, withheld whatever 15,000 hours of video from all the security cameras until Tucker or whomever got it and started to release it. And it's okay, that didn't happen. I mean, it just came out last week. Kamala Harris left at 11:12 a.m. She said she was there and they were scared and lying. I mean, they have, I watched the video of her exiting the building at 11:12 a.m. 2-3 hours before it started.
This none of this matters. You
truth
can't
doesn't matter.
Speak facts.
Why doesn't truth matter?
Because power matters. And there's something about
power matters to
the left. I'm not saying for myself.
To the people running it on the left. But to the people we interact with, why doesn't truth matter? So they're programmed to just believe this. They don't want to hear any alternative points of view or explore it for themselves.
Yeah, because it probably boils down to feelings at some point. No one wants to be wrong.
Yeah, confirmation bias. You don't want to be wrong.
Yeah. And I found from personal history, when you feel like you fit into a certain group or category of people, you don't have incentives. What are your incentives to rethink?
So truth isn't high enough on your priority list.
Maybe
your feelings, your ego,
well, I do think there's something to
fear of ostracism.
Yeah, I do think there's something to the incentive structure surrounding anybody's decisions to do whatever. Someone was talking about the Speaker of the House, and you can change the person, but if you don't change the incentive structure, it doesn't matter who's in there.
That's true. That's a good point.
And so I think you could probably swap that out for just somebody in their life, kind of. And what are the incentives? And that probably almost explains almost everything.
That's a lot of it. Yeah. So we go back to, educators and teachers unions. So the incentives are, I'm afraid of losing my job if we shake things up.
Yeah.
Let me tell you one thing. Don't forget that. So teachers, there was a big thing in the 80s, 90s, this push toward comp pay. So you're paid on how well you performed as a teacher. Push really never got through. Mm-hmm. And the reason I think one has to say that it never got through is because I think most teachers are afraid that they would do worse, right? If the majority of teachers thought they would get more pay,
Right.
they would vote for it.
Right.
They didn't vote for it, which leads me to believe over 50% of them think they're below average, which is interesting, right? Because less than 50% are below average, 49 or 49. And so I think that's interesting. Psychology is you have powers telling them, that you're going to do worse.
Yeah.
To your point.
Well, that's no different than if you had an employee. I think you were saying different ways that you've incented employees, and if you set the bar low, someone is going to meet that standard.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you set it high,
people rise to expectations usually.
Yeah. And I think that's another big thing is like consequences in society trying to erase consequences in any meaningful way.
Yeah.
But I did think of the third thing. It was climatism, climate alarmism.
More government control with a carbon capture, carbon tax.
Yeah. And when you start digging into the data, this is another thing someone will just go off on you on.
I've been doing it for 20 or 15 years.
Yeah. If you look at the data, you can be like, here, XYZ. I won't even get into it right here in the podcast.
No.
Then people are like, oh, and there's no answer to that. And you start to think, well, oh, okay. Why is that baked into why is it like a racial issue if climate this or that? And so I think that's the other and the thing is, it's when you think about it, it's kind of the opposite of like a religious apocalypse. It's an apocalypse of a different sort, like an existential threat to the planet, to humanity. The end times are here in environmentalism form,
Here's another, I'll wait for the comments from the old fart. So I was showing my kids this because I basically said, you have to excuse my skepticism of this whole climate alarmism. And I pulled up documentaries and magazine and newspaper articles from when I was a kid who said by 2000 we'd be in an ice age.
Right.
Like everything's done.
Polar bears weren't going to have any ice.
No, the opposite. Ice age. Everything would be frozen.
Well, I heard that when I was growing up that the polar bears were running out of ice.
Yeah. And so in the early 2000s, that's what they were saying. But anyone can go look at this.
Yeah.
You go back to the 80s and 90s, and they said it will be a complete ice age. The world is cooling, and it's going to be a disaster. And they used that, and then it flipped within like 10 years. Gore lost the campaign, and he switched and started going about his hockey stick discussion.
Yeah,
and it all switched to now we're going to overheat. And I also lived through acid rain is going to destroy. It's going to kill the ocean, kill the fish. It's just the pyramid would break down. Yeah. And literally, I had a top physicist telling me this in 85, that acid rain, sulfur dioxide rain, from our our pollution was going to kill the ecosystem within the next 10 years. And so I had two major events and the ozone hole.
I was just going to say
three.
That's one that I bring up all the time. Whatever happened to that hole in the ozone? I don't know.
It opens and closes. And maybe there's some evidence that we helped with CFCs. But three major climate alarmist things, one of them completely 180 degrees from the one they're saying now. And so you got to take it with a grain of salt.
But context, though, is everything. A lot of people that are young, they don't have any context, and it's back to the trust thing.
Yeah, and you don't have time to, I get it, you don't have time to research everything.
Well, here's my question for you, which isn't really for you, but it's for those listening. Is the Earth more important than humans?
Yeah, probably not. I would say not.
Because it's another, I feel like it really is another anti-human initiative. So we've talked a lot about like degrowth.
The Malthusians, number 4. I lost that one too, right? Overpopulation was going to destroy the planet.
Yeah. Destroy the planet. What about the people on the planet?
Well, and consequently, they would say the people, right? Then we were all going to die. But
but I don't know that that's the total vibe from people. Like
I think definitely a vibe toward reducing the number of people.
Yeah, but you see it like with animals and stuff too. Like that is more of a priority for some people than human flourishing. Animal rights and flourishing, so to speak,
PETA members.
It's just humans are diminished more and more and more. And I feel like that we're seeing that on all fronts, even this AI talk and like government overreach, if it got to a point where you can't even think or make a decision, are you still a human? Like that is the essential thing of being a human is your rational abilities. If you take away someone's ability to make choices, you've dehumanized them in almost the ultimate way.
Oh yeah. It's been prophesied by science fiction writers for 100 years, and we're living in it. And people are 50-70% of people are okay with it, I guess is what I'll say.
Yeah. Or just how many people are just like, I can't fight all this. Like it's all beyond me. I'm just going to just kind of live.
There's definitely that. There's definitely
Did you see Dune, or are you going to? I didn't. I haven't seen either.
I haven't. I saw the first one. I was never a fan. It's a remake, from the 90s. I wasn't a fan of the first one. It's not my kind of science
The story
fiction.
in general, or the actual movie?
The story.
Okay.
That's not my
going to war with the machines.
Yeah, it's not my type of. I don't know. For some reason, I'm more like the Optimus guy. I'm more of the Star Trek guy.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen it.
Okay. But specifically on the first one, then you just didn't like what?
So I saw the original and I saw the remake, and I don't know if I'm going to see. So I'm not a big fan of fantasy. Actually, I don't like fantasy at all. I want to see a hopeful vision of the future. And, Dune doesn't really show that. A lot of science fiction doesn't show that. It's apocalyptic type of things. I'm not a fan of that because it's, I said it last week. I think you should try to not give life to negative thoughts as much as you can.
But one could push back and say if you didn't have something like in 1984,
absolutely,
which isn't fun,
absolutely,
it's not even a fun book to read. To
but that was more of an academic exercise reading Brave New World in 1984 versus like blockbuster
for the sake of entertainment.
Movies.
So you would draw a distinction.
Probably
the importance of entertainment versus.
But I mean, I do promote that people should see hard things, movies, things like that, so that they know how bad it can be or get. So I do condone that, but I know. I have a feeling how bad things can be. I don't need to watch a lot of it.
Because was it Aristotle or maybe Socrates? I don't remember which one it was saying. The real mark of intelligence is being able to entertain something without believing it.
Two contradictory thoughts.
Yeah. And sometimes you have to know
what's possible.
Seeing what's bad like defines what's good for you in some ways.
No, I agree with that.
Yeah. I never did see the Matrix redos because I wasn't interested. I remember the original Matrix being pretty mind-blowing to me, though, at the time. Now it's just like, it's almost passe because...
That's the way it is, right?
Yeah.
I would take these movies from the 80s and be so excited to show my kids, Rocky, or I don't know what it would be. And show them, and it looks so lame in retrospect, right? The production's bad, cinematography's bad, acting isn't that great. It's like everything, sports, everything, the quality is just increases that...
But I would say that that's basically you've encapsulated why I used to never watch old movies and stuff, because I always felt like
there's
special
old movies,
but
the writing, the story is because that's all they had.
Yeah,
they couldn't rely on special effects, and I agree with that.
Yeah, that's our archetype thing. Yeah. All right.
Well, good stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
Check out
more for next week.
Check out objectivereality.ai.
Sign up on the waiting list.
Get on the waiting list because it's about to come out, and we love it, so we think you will too.
Absolutely.